Chapter 501, the 500th chapter. Time for a reward? A tense silence settled over the council chamber. Amid the wreckage of shattered shields and scorched banners, Shichi rose to her feet. "This crisis has been resolved," she began, her voice calm but urgent, "but another is already on the horizon." She swept her gaze across the assembly. The threat we just neutralized was the work of a single god-level anomaly. What happens if the next attack comes from 2 such foes? Or 10? Or someone even more powerful? A collective shudder ran through the room. Their last confrontation had almost wiped out the entire force. They could not afford another near catastrophe. "Shichi," someone finally spoke up, "what do you propose?" She met their eyes steadily. "We must establish a special position within the Hero Association, reserved for an SSS-ranked hero, and recruit the one called the Savior. He's the only person capable of defeating god-level monsters. If we don't secure his allegiance, some other group will, and then we'll be defenseless." Her plan was clear and compelling. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the council. "Then it's settled," the chairman said. "Our top priority now is to find the Savior and bring him into the association." Shiki nodded. "Yes, it's time to shift the Hero Association's focus from profit to the preservation of humanity's future." The wealthy patrons seated at the long table exchanged quick, calculating looks, already imagining the prestige and influence they'd gain by aligning themselves with the Savior. The game had changed, and everyone knew it. The chamber was tense as the senior officers of the Hero Association gathered around the long conference table. One of them finally broke the silence. "I'm convinced he's the only one who can save us," he said, voice steady but urgent. "With him leading the charge, we'll actually have a chance at the next crisis." They'd all seen the reports. When a god-level aberration shows up, even their finest S-class heroes are helpless. Against those towering nightmares, the best of the best fall just like everyone else. It was a hard lesson learned through bitter defeat, one they'd quietly refused to acknowledge for years. Yet here they were. The unthinkable had happened. A true god-level anomaly had appeared. But whispers had reached them of a man, no, a savior, whose power eclipsed even those dread entities. If they could recruit him, it would change everything. He wouldn't just be another hero, he could become the association's ultimate weapon, the very keystone of global defense. It was a perfect plan in theory. But there was one question none of them could answer. How do you convince someone that powerful to join the Hero Association? They exchanged uneasy glances. They all knew the man, or boy as the rumors wavered, was no ordinary recruit. He called himself Ethan, and his abilities exceeded their wildest estimates. Now it was up to them to find a way to bring him into the fold before the next god-level threat struck. Shichi sat at the head of the polished conference table, her gaze unwavering. "We all agree that he's the strongest human and the most powerful hero on Earth. That means we need a flawless plan." A wealthy sponsor folded his arms. "Which brings us to the big question. How do we recruit him into the Hero Association?" Shichi nodded. "First, we launch a thorough investigation into his identity, abilities, and motivations. Once we fully understand Ethan's background and goals, we extend a formal invitation." "But what if he turns us down?" another backer asked. "We can't exactly force him." With a faint smile, Shichi replied, "Of course not. Coercion won't work against someone of his caliber. Instead, we'll leverage incentives. Exclusive access to our top research, cutting-edge equipment, strategic intelligence, every resource he needs to carry out his missions more effectively. We'll show him that the Hero Association is the one organization he can truly depend on." Outside these private deliberations, the Hero Association's website and discussion forums were alight with speculation about the mysterious savior. Who was he? How did he develop such formidable powers? And most important, why had he suddenly appeared on the world stage? Amid the conjecture, fans voiced their admiration and their hope that Ethan would soon don the official uniform and join their ranks. Ethan lounged nearby, entirely too lazy to pay attention, until Saitama suddenly found himself face to face with 3 strangers. One of them even struck him as a bit odd. As the only person who'd traveled back in time and lived to tell the tale, Saitama already understood the stakes. "Huh?" he muttered, blinking at them. Esdeath cocked her head, eyeing Saitama in confusion. With his unassuming look and apparently average abilities, she saw nothing extraordinary. Boros, however, stiffened. He could sense immense power radiating off Saitama. In the original timeline, only Asura and Boros ever detected what made Saitama so formidable. Not Hungry Wolf, not Monster King Orochi. Asura Unicorn's danger sense hinted at something unusual, and Boros' energy perception confirmed it. Yes, Boros said, turning to Esdeath. After me, he's the strongest being on Earth. Ethan gave a quick nod. Poros, the massive creature at his side, bristled with interest. Saitama shifted under their curious gazes. So, who are you guys anyway? Ethan's calm voice carried across the clearing. I'm Ethan. He glanced at Poros and raised an eyebrow. Poros, show him what you've got. Without warning or courtesy, Poros sprang forward. His fist cut through the air, hurtling straight for Saitama. Chapter 10, Clash of Titans. Boros' shattered ship lay smoldering in the dunes behind him, but thanks to the immense energy reserves and the restoration ritual performed by Ethan, the warlord had returned to his peak form. Standing before him was Saitama, calm, composed, and utterly unfazed. With barely a warning, Boros launched a devastating right hook. Saitama made no effort to dodge. The punch connected squarely with his jaw, hurling him backward. He skidded across the desert floor, carving a blazing trail in his wake. Boros let out a thunderous laugh. Just one punch, and he's flying. Puzzled, Boros shook his fist. What's this? You're just gonna stand there and take it. Saitama sat up, brushed the dust from his gloves, and rose without a scratch. That's weird, he muttered. I expected at least a bruise. A surge of confidence electrified Boros. If he couldn't defeat Ethan, surely he could crush this seemingly ordinary opponent. Without another word, he charged again, fist drawn back for a crushing blow. Saitama cracked his knuckles in response. Their punches met with an ear-splitting roar. The air around them exploded, carving a massive void in the battlefield. When the dust settled, Saitama stood firm, his gloves still glowing red-hot. But Boros stared in shock. His right arm dangled limply at his side, shattered by that single counterstrike. From the ridge above, Esdeath watched in stunned silence. How could a man who looked so unremarkable break Boros' arm with just one punch? Boros stared at his shattered arm for barely a heartbeat. Then, without hesitation, it knit itself back together, flesh and bone fusing until it was whole again. Saitama's eyes widened. Impressed? Boros asked, flexing his regenerated limb. That's just my racial trait, advanced regeneration. A slow grin spread across Boros' face. If one punch could snap his arm, then this Saitama had already eclipsed every warrior Boros had ever faced, except Ethan. With a roar, he charged again, both fists a blur of motion. Each strike came faster than lightning. This time, Saitama didn't meet him head-on. He slipped and weaved, letting Boros' blows tear through the mountains and crack the earth where he just stood. Not even the crumbling terrain could slow Boros' relentless assault. "Cut it out, you brute!" Saitama shouted, tensing every muscle. He drew back his arm, formed a perfect fist, and delivered the simplest, most devastating blow he knew. Norm. Chapter 502, Boros' next challenger. Just a regular punch. Boros braced himself as Saitama stepped forward, but the hero didn't unleash any flashy techniques or send out an energy wave. He simply drew back his arm and threw a plain, unassuming punch. Still, the power behind that fist was unlike anything Boros had ever encountered. It felt impossibly heavy, like the weight of a collapsing star, capable of crushing anything in its path. Boros steadied himself and met the blow with all his might. The moment their knuckles collided, a thunderous crack echoed through the air, as if the very world were shuddering. Boros felt his fists slam against an unyielding mountain of force. Pain shot up his arm. His bones felt as though they would shatter, and yet when he glanced at Saitama, the hero was still standing upright, as fresh and casual as ever. Shock froze Boros in place. This was beyond anything he had imagined. He tried to pull back, to dodge the next strike, but it was too late. Saitama's fist rocketed forward again with relentless speed. The air itself seemed to explode around them. Boros barely registered the impact before he was sent hurtling backward, his body sailing through space as though struck by a comet. Dust and debris ripped from the battleground in his wake, and for a moment, Boros tasted freedom, only to slam into the ground in a devastating impact that shook the earth. Boros struggled to rise, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. He stared at Saitama, who remained perfectly calm, as if he'd merely tapped him with a gentle handshake. The gulf between them had never been clearer. Saitama cracked his knuckles, his face expressionless, and uttered 3 simple words, "Okay, your move." Boros tumbled helplessly through the sky, limbs flailing as his body threatened to fall apart. He fought to steady himself, but it was already too late. In an instant, the cohesion of his cells unraveled, his flesh and bone shredding like an overripe watermelon under a hammer. Blood and tissue sprayed outward in a gruesome haze. Then Saitama struck. His fist blazed with a faint, otherworldly glow. The moment it connected, all the air around Boros was instantaneously expelled, drawn into a spinning vortex that raged like a miniature cyclone. The whirlwind was visible to the naked eye, a yawning hole in reality itself that sucked up everything in its path. Boros's shattered form was caught in that maelstrom. His struggle grew weak, futile against such overwhelming force. What kind of power is this? Boros gasped, disbelief and fury warring in his chest. He had wrecked armies across the galaxy, carved his name into every planet's history, yet here he was, on a single blue world, undone by 2 monsters. Ethan stood a short distance away, completely unscathed, his stance calm but alert. How could this earthling be so powerful? Boros had once dismissed mankind as inconsequential, but now he faced 2 adversaries who outmatched him at every turn. He tried to muster the strength to shout, "This can't kill me." But the words barely left his throat before something impossible happened. His shredded flesh and blood began to swirl, drawn together by an unearthly force. Cell fragments glowed, knitting back into solid form. Saitama, eyes widening slightly, watched as Boros's body reassembled itself midair, piece by piece, until he stood whole once more, scarred but unbowed, ready to fight on. Ethan watched in stunned silence. Never before had he seen anyone survive more than 2 of Saitama's punches. It was common knowledge that Saitama's normal strength could obliterate even dragon-level monsters with ease. Only Boros had ever endured that first thunderous blow, his armor shattering yet leaving him alive. The arrogant Monster King Orochi had been reduced to ash by a single hit and finished off by the second, an ultimate dragon-level strike. And yet here stood Boros, unbowed. Without warning, Boros bellowed his challenge. Meteor Burst! In an instant, he unleashed his ultimate technique. His fist vanished and reappeared, and in a fraction of a moment, moving at sublight speed. Esdeath, who understood the sheer terror of that move, darted to Ethan's side, eyes wide with alarm. Even Saitama, usually so indifferent, blinked in surprise. He had never encountered an opponent this fast. Boros's punch blazed like the hottest, brightest meteor in the cosmos, carrying the force of near-light velocity. It hurtled toward Saitama with unimaginable power. Ethan's heart pounded as he braced himself. This would be the ultimate test of Saitama's strength. The destructive force behind Boros's punch shattered every notion of what a physical attack could be. The moment his fist cut through the air, the atmosphere around it ignited, spawning colossal vortices that twisted so furiously they seemed poised to swallow the world. His gauntlet glowed with an indescribable radiance, at once scorching and freezing, obliterating and forging. Wherever it passed, space itself contracted, then ballooned outward in an instant, ripping open countless microscopic fissures that snaked wildly through the sky, as though the very fabric of reality would tear apart. From that fist emanated a cataclysmic power, capable of unraveling and recreating everything in its path. Time itself appeared to halt. Every eye in the arena was riveted on Boros's strike, aware that its impact would seal the fate of all. Ethan staggered under an unprecedented force. He could feel the raw, indescribable power coiled in Boros's fist, enough to annihilate everything in its path. This blow dwarfed any attack Ethan had ever faced. The moment Boros's fist struck his cheek, the air around them ruptured in a violent shockwave. Invisible at first, it roared outward with such speed that buildings, trees, and even the earth itself tore apart in its wake. The heat generated by the impact ignited the oxygen-rich atmosphere, setting the scene ablaze. Flames fanned out in every direction, swallowing the surroundings in a roaring sea of fire. Ethan's body was blasted backward as if caught in a hurricane. He traced a long, arcing trajectory through the air before slamming into the ground with bone-jarring force. The impact cratered the earth beneath him, sending cracks radiating outward like jagged scars on the surface. Around the newly formed pit, the ground heaved and split, as though it might collapse entirely. In that instant, every structure within the blast's radius pancaked into smoldering ruin. Dust and embers filled the sky, and for a heartbeat, the world fell silent, save for the distant roar of the inferno consuming what remained. The distant mountains shattered under the sheer force of Boros's punch. Enormous boulders and tons of earth broke free, tumbling down in roaring landslides. Mud and rock surged toward the city like a tidal wave, ripping up streets and leveling everything in their path. This wasn't just an attack on Ethan, it was a cataclysmic blow to the entire region, as if a meteor had struck the ground. Crack. For a heartbeat, dust and rubble filled the air. Then, against all odds, Ethan stirred. He pushed himself up from the crater, brushing grit from his shoulders. His face was completely unmarked, no cuts, no bruises, nothing to show he'd been hit. At most, his shirt hung limp and dirty, but otherwise he stood there perfectly intact. Boros froze in midair, his muscles trembling with disbelief. He had thrown everything he had into that punch, his most devastating blow, yet Saitama simply stood firm, utterly unshaken. A thrill of excitement coursed through Boros's veins. He knew that, if he was to topple an opponent like this unbeaten earthling, he would have to push himself far beyond his limits. Raising his fist again, Boros felt every cell in his body ignite. The air around him rippled with power as he drew on reserves he hadn't dared touch before. In a blur of movement, his arm rocketed forward once more, the roar of destruction trailing in its wake. It was as if a planet's worth of force aimed to pulverize the ground beneath them. Still, Saitama did not flinch. His expression was unyielding, undaunted, almost eagerly so. This was the first time he had faced an opponent of such overwhelming might, and something in him stirred with anticipation. He could almost track Boros's movements in real time, his senses surprisingly sharp under pressure. Boros reappeared before him in an instant, his fist coalescing into a blistering sphere of energy. The battle was far from over. If anything, it was only just beginning. Under the impact of Boros's punch, the very air seemed to catch fire, bathing the battlefield in a fierce, fiery glow. A hurricane-force shockwave rippled outward from his fist, swallowing everything in its path. It churned the clouds overhead, as if intent on consuming the entire world. Yet through that inferno of dust and light, Boros saw Saitama lift his arm, calmly meeting the blow. He actually kept pace with Boros's speed. For a moment, Boros froze, then reminded himself of Ethan's precedent and the strange crystalline aura he'd already witnessed. He shook off his astonishment and braced himself. Suddenly the light exploded into a brilliance as harsh as the midday sun, too intense to meet with unshielded eyes. A thunderous roar, like a sky-shattering explosion, rattled every bone, stirring the earth beneath them. No words could capture the raw magnitude of that punch. Saitama felt the impact like the onrush of a tidal wave. The force slammed into him, hurling him backward like a meteor struck by a comet. He skidded across the shattered ground, rocks and dust flying in his wake, every nerve screaming from the blow's relentless power. The ground shuddered beneath the impact, splitting open in vast fissures that webbed outward. Buildings and trees alike were obliterated the moment those cracks reached them, reduced to smoldering ruins. Yet Boros showed no sign of letting up. He flitted through the air in a blur of light, each strike heralded by a blinding flash and a thunderous roar. His speed was so immense that onlookers could only make out streaks of brightness, like meteors tearing across the sky. Under Boros's relentless assault, Saitama was forced to yield ground, repeatedly stumbling back toward the shattered landscape. Still, he refused to surrender. Every time he landed, he recalibrated his balance in an instant, bracing himself for the next onslaught. The sheer force of their blows ignited the surrounding air, twisting it into roiling currents of superheated wind. Those currents intertwined in the sky, creating a spectacular, flame-like vortex through which Boros darted again and again, each appearance lighting up the battlefield with searing brilliance and deafening force. Ethan watched in stunned silence as Boros's relentless onslaught shook the very ground beneath them. Each blast threatened to obliterate the horizon, each collision crackled with planet-shattering force. Yet Saitama remained perfectly unscathed, like an immovable stone. Ethan's warning echoed in Boros's mind. Earthlings possessed unmatched resilience. Now seeing it firsthand, Boros's shock gave way to begrudging envy. Calm and composed, Saitama took a step forward and landed a single, unhurried punch that sent Boros hurtling backward. Pow! The impact was so simple, so effortless, that it almost belied its power. Shards of armor exploded around Boros, but he reformed instantly, eyes blazing. Consecutive ordinary punches, he bellowed. In an instant, Saitama's fist blurred into 100 shadowy afterimages, hammering Boros from every angle. Each strike rocked the alien warrior's core, but still, he would not fall. You truly live up to the legend of Earth's champions, Boros roared, voice trembling with equal parts respect and rage. But this battle is far from over. Drawing on the secret reserve of power he'd held back when he first faced Ethan, Boros lunged. In a flash, he snatched Saitama's cape. Ah, my cape! Saitama exclaimed, but there was no time to react. Boros flung him skyward and began to spin him at 1,000 revolutions per second. A howling vortex tore across the battlefield, uprooting trees and cracking boulders in its wake. Then, with a final brutal twist, Boros released Saitama. The hero shot into the stratosphere like a rag doll, his figure shrinking into a mere dot against the sky. On the scorched earth below, Boros streaked forward, determination ignited. The final phase of their titanic duel had begun. Boros's footsteps struck the ground like rolling thunder, each impact shattering rock and kicking up clouds of dust. He needed every ounce of acceleration he could muster, and in less than a heartbeat, he propelled himself to an astonishing velocity, over 300,000 kilometers per second. His body now surged with unimaginable power and speed, every fiber straining toward its peak. With his eyes wide, Boros locked onto his opponent, Saitama, who was already hurtling skyward from their last exchange. Gathering all his might, he launched himself forward like a living projectile, roaring with a voice that seemed ready to rend the very air in two. Flames erupted around his right foot, an otherworldly blaze born of his raw energy rather than ordinary fire. The heat was so intense that the air warped and shimmered, as if reality itself bent under its pressure. His flaming foot became a meteor slicing through the sky, the concentrated force of the universe coalescing at his toes. In a single, devastating motion, Boros swung his leg in a colossal arc and delivered a kick aimed squarely at Saitama. With this kick, he bellowed, "I'll send you all the way to the moon." The impact that followed shook the heavens. Bang! A deafening crack rent the air as Lord Boros's right foot slammed into Saitama's body. In an instant, everything around him blurred, the very fabric of the sky seeming to tear open. Under that titanic force, Saitama was cast like a meteor, streaking toward the moon. Boros's strength was beyond comprehension, enough to change the very colors of earth and sky, to make the stars themselves tremble. This single kick could have flattened mountains in an instant, boiled entire oceans, even altered the hues of wind and cloud. As Saitama hurtled skyward, a brilliant tail of light streamed from his form, like a celestial comet blazing across the night. That radiant arc carved a perfect curve through the heavens before vanishing into the darkness. Ethan's figure tore through the atmosphere like a runaway meteor, hurtling toward the moon at breathtaking speed. Behind him, a luminous tail streaked across the night sky, dazzling, spectacular. As he sliced through the air, the surrounding gases ignited, forming a searing blaze that roared like a colossal dragon, lighting up the heavens. Despite the dragon-like inferno trailing him, Ethan showed no sign of slowing, until, that is, he neared the lunar surface. Even as his velocity dipped slightly, it remained staggering. When he finally struck, the impact unleashed a thunderous roar. A vast crater ripped open at the point of contact, flinging rock and dust in every direction. Under the force of the blow, the moon's crust trembled as though on the brink of collapse. Its gravity wavered, however briefly, and even Earth felt the shock wave, the ground itself shuddering at the tremendous power of Ethan's collision. In an instant, the gravitational balance between Earth and its moon collapsed. Across every ocean, tides swelled to terrifying heights, walls of water surged inland, obliterating coastlines. Simultaneously, the planet's atmosphere convulsed, erupting into supersonic gales that roared around the globe. Hurricanes and tempests followed in their wake, dragging humanity into total upheaval. Yet Earth's ordeal was only half the story. On the moon, Ethan's body struck with unimaginable force. He buried himself neck-deep in lunar regolith and rock, then skidded across the surface, gouging a vast chasm that split the moon's crust like a fault line. Layers of stone and dust exploded outward, peppering the horizon with debris. Craters, fissures, and pockmarks multiplied in seconds, as though the moon itself had been sundered by some colossal cataclysm. Finally, Ethan came to rest on the far side, his form fused into the lunar bedrock as if he'd been born there. The impact scarred the moon beyond recognition, and back on Earth, the tidal onslaught and raging storms raged on, a grim reminder that nothing in the cosmos would ever be the same. Ethan's eyes fluttered open to emptiness. He felt nothing, no pain, no air, just the cold, silent expanse pressing in on him. Slowly, he realized he was lying face first in lunar dust, his body half buried in a crater's rim. As he pushed himself upright, the full scope of the catastrophe became clear. The moon's once pristine surface was fractured and pockmarked as though some unimaginable force had shattered it from within. Beyond the jagged horizon of broken rock, Earth hung in the black sky like a wounded sapphire. Its familiar blue-green swirl was laced with sickly patches of brown and gray, signs of climate apocalypse unleashed when the moon's orbit shifted. Tides had run amok, weather patterns gone wild, ecosystems collapsed. The planet was still spinning, but it was no longer the peaceful haven Ethan had known. He drew in a breath and choked. There was no air here on the moon. Panic flickered in his chest, then died as he forced himself calm. He scanned the crater floor until his hand closed on a fist-sized chunk of lunar basalt. Setting the rock on the ground, he tested its weight, estimating the forces at work. He ran the calculations in his mind, the moon's weakened gravity, the distance to Earth, the velocity he'd need to surmount the new, uncertain trajectory. Ethan crouched, muscles coiling like springs. He inhaled, eyes fixed on the distant globe suspended in space, and launched himself upward. In an instant, he was a blazing comet streaking away from the shattered ruins of the moon. The impact of his departure reverberated through the satellite. A thunderous crack split the silence. Dust and debris cascaded down fissures that snaked across the surface. With one final shudder, the moon groaned as though tearing itself apart. But Ethan was already gone, hurtling toward Earth on a single-minded mission to set things right. Ethan's kick shattered what remained of the moon's crust, sending clouds of rock and dust billowing into the void. As he leapt away, he crossed the emptiness between worlds in the blink of an eye, his speed seeming to defy time itself. A gleaming silver trail stretched out behind him, arcing perfectly across the black canvas of space. Drawing inexorably toward Earth, Ethan began to feel his passage through its upper atmosphere. Friction ignited the surrounding air, scorching it white-hot and creating a dazzling corona that pierced the night. On the ground, people looked up to see a radiant streak cutting the sky like a celestial comet. When Ethan finally re-entered the lower atmosphere, the heat intensified. Flames roared around him in a brilliant meteor-like blaze, illuminating coastlines and cities as though the sun itself had momentarily dropped into Earth's sky. Yet despite the ferocity of his descent, Ethan's control never wavered. He tempered the destructive force of his own power, ensuring that the planet below felt only a flash of light, and the reassuring certainty that its guardian had returned. The Earth still trembled from Ethan's leap. In an instant, the planet's gravitational field shifted, setting off tidal disturbances the world over. Under the combined pull of the moon and Ethan, sea levels began to surge and fall unpredictably, unleashing colossal waves that battered coastlines and wreaked havoc on seaside cities. Farther inland, the shock of Ethan's jump rippled through the crust, triggering earthquakes in regions once considered geologically stable. Volcanoes, too, roared back to life, hurling molten rock and plumes of ash high into the sky, where they billowed into ominous, smoldering clouds. Yet Ethan would not allow this cataclysmic force to persist. As he descended, he carefully calibrated both his strength and his speed. At the precise moment he neared the surface, he eased his momentum just enough to prevent further destruction. Ethan touched down with purposeful control, steady and deliberate, sparking neither the feared megaquakes nor the fiery eruptions many had anticipated. In that measured landing, he proved that even the greatest power could be wielded with restraint. Even though Saitama's jump didn't utterly shatter the moon, the shockwave from his leap was enough to nudge its orbit. That tiny shift, Esdeath realized with growing alarm, would eventually ripple through Earth's tides and even subtly alter the climate. She had already been stunned the moment Boros blasted Saitama into the sky. She hadn't expected him to actually reach lunar heights and disrupt its course. Before Boros could gather himself, a tremendous boom thundered behind him. Saitama plummeted back toward the surface, but a few dozen meters up, slammed his fist into the ground to break his fall. The impact sent a swirl of dust into the air, and when it cleared, he was standing there, completely unscathed. "I'm back," he called, surveying the battlefield with that trademark blank stare. Boros widened his single, glowing eye in disbelief. He'd expected at least some sign of damage. Instead, Saitama stood before him, as whole as ever. Gritting his teeth, Boros finally admitted defeat, at least for the moment. "All right," he said, the edges of his voice crackling with frustration. "We'll stop here. You're not my match." Ethan watched from the sidelines, already guessing what would have come next. Boros's ultimate weapon, the collapsing star roaring cannon. Of course, if things went too far, Ethan could always rewind time, but even he couldn't deny how devastating that attack would be. "He's too strong," Ethan murmured. Boros, catching the hesitation in his opponent's eyes, chose not to press the issue. After all, Ethan had now witnessed the full power of the roaring star cannon, and that alone was enough to call a temporary truce. If Ethan says so, Saitama must truly be incredibly powerful. Chapter 505, Saitama's Extra Training. Saitama exhaled in relief as Boros let go of his battle form and reverted to his original body. Clearly, the alien overlord had no desire to continue the fight. Nobody wants extra trouble. Turning his gaze, Saitama spotted Ethan standing off to the side. It was obvious that Ethan had been the one to force Boros into submission. Judging by Boros's dejected look, Ethan had to be stronger than the conqueror himself. As Saitama studied him more closely, recognition finally clicked. "Ethan?" Saitama said with surprise. Ethan offered a wry grin. "About time you remembered me." A flash of memory. Ethan had indeed fought Saitama once before, wielding the Power Stone's pure ability to copy Saitama's strength with no limiter attached. At the time, Saitama had been so focused or perhaps so distracted that he never truly registered his opponent's face. Now, though, after all the extra training he'd put in, Saitama was leagues beyond his former self. As series creator One famously remarked, "Every new morning, Saitama is strong enough to one-punch his yesterday into oblivion." That idea alone sets this version of Saitama apart from the Murata remake, where his power growth erupts exponentially, far surpassing even the legendary Hungry Wolf's upper limits. Ethan's grin widened as he faced Saitama under the harsh sun. "Funny you should ask," he said, voice low with confidence. "I've gotten a lot stronger lately. Shall we see how far you've come?" Saitama scratched the back of his head. "Sure, but let's pick a more suitable arena." He waved off the ruined cityscapes behind them. "Somewhere there's no collateral damage." Ethan nodded. He remembered how he'd once used Saitama to knock Boros off his feet, then turned and bested Saitama himself, sending a clear message to every would-be challenger. Earth's defenders were not to be trifled with. Boros, for one, would be watching closely for today's rematch. With a thought, Ethan shifted the battlefield. In an instant, the two heroes and their onlookers found themselves in a vast, empty desert, one of the wasted expanses that stretch between the 20 or so inhabited cities of this world. No civilians, no buildings, just wind-scoured dunes and distant rocky outcroppings. Perfect for an all-out fight. Saitama took a deep breath, letting the arid air fill his lungs. "Be careful, Ethan," he warned. "You've gotten stronger, but I've been training too." Ethan's expression turned serious. "Show me what you've got." Saitama cracked his knuckles, stance casual. "Here goes. Normal punch." In a heartbeat, his fist blurred toward Ethan, but Ethan watched impassively. At the last moment, he vanished, so fast that Saitama's eyes tracked only empty air. The hero blinked, startled. He spun left, then right, no Ethan in sight. Before he could react, a thunderous impact slammed into his back, sending him hurtling through the sand. A single, earth-shaking blow from Ethan had caught him completely off guard. As Saitama struggled to his feet, sand cascading from his hair, Ethan stood a dozen yards away, fists still poised. "Your turn," he called, voice calm as the desert wind, his eyes alight with the thrill of the fight. Boros's eyes went wide as he saw Ethan, who, until moments ago, had seemed impervious, bleeding from the corner of his mouth. Just one punch had drawn blood. The shock rippled through him. Ethan himself pressed a fingertip to his lip, finding the warm smear of blood, his cheek bruised and swollen. His normally vacant grin faded. In its place was a hard, focused glare. Even the way he carried himself shifted, from casual to controlled, from unserious to deadly serious. Boros stared in disbelief. A super earthling? He breathed. He'd seen Ethan's super earthling transformation before. Hair had changed color, marking a clear shift in power. That matched Boros's own experience with his alien transformations. But now Ethan's head remained as bare as ever. No hair, no flashy fanfare, yet the aura around him had ballooned to unimaginable proportions. If earlier, his energy had felt like a restless ocean, now it spread out like an entire universe. Boros's jaw dropped. So this was Ethan's true form, subtle in appearance but limitless in strength. No hair growth, no overt sign of change, yet more invincible than anything Boros had ever encountered. He realized with a mix of awe and fear that underestimating Ethan one last time might be his gravest mistake. Boros staggered, the first hint of doubt flickering in his eyes. He'd never faced an opponent who made him feel so utterly outmatched. "Serious punch," Saitama declared, his face sharpening with resolve. Ever reserved for only the gravest threats, the Serious series erupted in a single cataclysmic blow. It cleaved through Boros's own Star Collapse roaring cannon, the very attack that had enough power to scour the planet's surface. The impact struck Boros squarely, obliterating his lower half in an instant. A gale-force wind tore through the sky, ripping the clouds in two across half the globe. The world itself seemed to shudder under the force, as though the heavens and the earth had collided. In the aftermath, Rudd, Boros's lieutenant, threw what looked like an idle punch, as if testing the air. Almost simultaneously, Saitama's Serious punch cut back toward the battlefield. But before it could land, Ethan stepped forward. With a casual flick of his wrist, he launched a single punch that met Saitama's head-on. Time itself hung suspended. Silence swallowed the scene as a blinding flare of light shot outward, followed by an earth-shaking shockwave. The very fabric of space around them quivered and warped, and for a heartbeat, nothing existed but that titanic clash of wills. A searing shockwave of energy erupted from Ethan, racing across the desert and instantly obliterating everything in its path. The ground quaked under the blast as countless grains of sand and dust were swept into the maelstrom, forming a towering sandstorm. From his vantage point, Boros couldn't help but marvel once more at the astonishing power these two super-earthlings wielded. When the dust settled, Saitama emerged at the storm's edge, eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. He hadn't expected Ethan's strength to match his own. His full-force punch had been stopped in its tracks. But rather than falter, Saitama's eyes burned with renewed determination. "All right," he muttered. "No holding back. Time to get serious." In the blink of an eye, he vanished, leaving behind a swarm of afterimages. Dozens of fists pounded toward Ethan like a torrential downpour, each blow infused with raw, overwhelming force. Their battle rent the desert floor asunder, gouging out massive chasms. High above them, clouds shredded under the assault, revealing streaks of brilliant blue sky. Yet Ethan moved with effortless poise, sidestepping every strike as if he were simply taking a stroll through a peaceful garden. Time and again, he evaded Saitama's onslaught by the barest margin. Witnessing this, Boros stood frozen in astonishment, unable to tear his eyes away. Ethan's movements were unlike anything Saitama had ever encountered. The hero's fists blurred through the air at blinding speed, yet Ethan seemed to anticipate every strike, sidestepping and weaving with uncanny precision. For a moment, it looked as though Saitama's overwhelming power would prevail by sheer force, until Ethan made his move. With almost casual ease, Ethan launched a single, light jab. It appeared effortless, but the force behind it was devastating. Saitama reacted instantly, but it was too late. The punch smashed into his chest like a battering ram. A numbing shock seared through Saitama's body, and he was sent sprawling to the ground, winded and beaten. Esdeath and Boros, watching from the sidelines, could hardly believe their eyes. Neither had expected the clash to end so abruptly, or with such a surprising victor. Still gasping for breath, Saitama struggled to rise. His endurance was legendary, and even as blood seeped from his lips, his wounds began knitting themselves shut. He pressed a hand to his left chest, feeling the echo of that single crushing impact. It hurt so much. He coughed, spitting out a mouthful of blood before his body's rapid healing took over. Though most of the damage repaired itself in seconds, Saitama knew better than to underestimate Ethan. There was a gulf between them that raw determination alone couldn't bridge. And yet, despite the pain and the clear mismatch in skill, Saitama refused to yield. He had a goal to pursue, and he wouldn't stop until he reached it. Chapter 506, Returning to My Empire with Boros. Saitama couldn't help but crack a grin beneath his ever-blank expression. Ethan's power was ridiculous, so overwhelming that Saitama felt that long-missing thrill of battle bubbling back up. He hadn't sensed tension like this in ages, but Ethan, oblivious to Saitama's reaction, simply turned his attention to the battered Boros at his side. "Boros," Ethan said, his tone indifferent, "I'm sending you back to my empire now. My forces will handle you from here." Boros blinked in surprise. "Your empire?" Ethan nodded casually. "Yeah, remember how I had the Martian and Venusian empires under my thumb? They were just shells, never truly empowered. I never bothered to give them real strength, but now I don't need any restraint." "Your empire?" Boros echoed, still unfazed. After all, he himself ruled a star cluster of over 1,000 inhabited worlds. Yet the title of sovereign bored him. He preferred the chaos of pirate raids and engineered rebellions just to find worthy opponents. In that way, he wasn't so different from Esdeath, a supreme being who chased only the thrill of combat, not the trappings of a throne. With that, Ethan raised his hand, and a portal shimmered open behind them. Without another word, he nudged Boros through it. In the blink of an eye, the alien warlord vanished, whisked away to face his fate in Ethan's realm, where an army waited to ensure he'd never threaten any world again. Ethan led Boros back into the Marvel Universe and deliberately set him down within the Venusian Empire's borders. In time, the Martian Empire would follow suit, relocating from Mars to Venus and uniting into a single, vast dominion. The move also served a practical purpose. By establishing a powerful foothold on Venus, they could discourage any uninvited earthly visitors. No more unexpected appearances by Tony Stark. "I don't have any of your kind," Ethan told Boros, "but I can copy your genes and create them." "Copy my kind?" Boros echoed, curiosity tingling at the edge of his alien features. He didn't protest. Ethan was stronger, still Boros's master, and whatever Ethan willed, Boros obeyed. Without another word, Ethan reached out and laid a hand on Boros's arm. A pulsing wave of energy flowed from his fingertips and seeped into Boros's flesh. This was Ethan's extraordinary gift, absolute control over the genetics of living organisms. He extracted fragments of Boros's DNA, then wove them through his power so that cells would split, multiply, and evolve. This was no simple cloning process. Ethan wasn't producing a carbon copy of Boros. Instead, he recombined and mutated the genetic code, forging an entirely new people, descendants shaped in Boros's image, yet uniquely their own. Boros surveyed the new life forms with a mixture of fascination and wariness. At first glance, they resembled him. Same armor-like skin, same single, unblinking eye. But beyond the superficial likeness, each child possessed its own strength, personality, and way of thinking. He had never seen anything quite like it. Ethan stood a short distance away, arms folded, watching his creations come to life. Though they had only just hatched, the children moved with remarkable confidence. Their gaits were steady, their gestures fluid. There wasn't a hint of the helplessness or fragility that marked human infants. Where a newborn human might tremble or lie still, these beings strode boldly forward, exploring their surroundings with bright curiosity. In that moment, Ethan's vision felt fully realized. He had granted himself whatever superpower he desired, much like the legendary Silver Superman, achieving near omnipotence. Of course, there remained an absolute ceiling to strength. Even omnipotence bowed to the laws of higher dimensions. But for now, Ethan's primary goal was clear: to push his own power ever higher, saving other projects for later. Boros narrowed his eye, reflecting Ethan's figure in its pupil. He hadn't expected Ethan's experiment to be mere gene cloning, though he was familiar with the technique. This, however, was far more sophisticated. Boros had once hoped that such technology might produce a worthy rival, an opponent matched perfectly to his own strength. Now he wondered if Ethan's children would fulfill that role, or if they would surpass them all. Ethan stood over the glowing cradle, arms folded, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. For a warrior of his caliber, finding an opponent worthy of his full strength was nearly impossible. He had tried countless clones and prototypes, copies spliced from scraps of his own DNA, but each one proved a pale imitation, faint echoes of power, lacking the raw force that made the Boros bloodline legendary. Now, however, he had taken a different approach. From a mere fragment of Boros's essence, he had grown something entirely new, a true scion of the Boros family, born not from replication, but from genuine creation. Watching the infant pulse with energy, Ethan felt that rare thrill of anticipation. "Fascinating," he said, his voice quiet in the sterile chamber. "An energy-based life form with an actual infancy, yet unlike human infants, helpless and soft, you're more like an animal, able to stand, to step, immediately after birth." Across from him, Boros inclined his head. "Human babies take months before they can even hold their heads up. Most animals, elephants, deer, even certain birds, are on their feet within hours. Our kind, we mature differently. Infancy lasts barely a heartbeat before we enter puberty." He paused, eyes fixed on the newborn as it shifted its weight, testing the stability of its tiny legs. That stage, puberty, is when our development crystallizes. Only then can we begin true self-training, unlocking our potential and refining our power. Ethan nodded, stepping closer. The air hummed around the infant, crackling with latent strength. He reached out and with a gentle touch, stroked the creature's energy-wreathed head. "Soon, you'll grow fast," he said. "Faster than any human child, but you'll need guidance, discipline, and when you're ready, you'll be my greatest challenge." Boros offered a rare, approving smile. "Then let us begin." Together, they turned their attention to the child of pure energy, standing poised on the threshold between infancy and power, an entirely new legacy born under their watchful gaze. They're still in their infancy, but even at this stage, their power is astonishing. On the racial value scale, a human registers as a mere 1. A typical Asgardian sits at 5, a scion at 10, and these young Boros prodigies already clock in around 8 or 9. Ethan studied them with a surgeon's detachment. He'd mapped and manipulated their entire genome, refining their biology to an unprecedented degree. Boros had explained that his people don't reproduce the way humans do, with complex courtship or mating rituals. Instead, they employ a kind of parthenogenesis, extracting only the genetic material they need from a single progenitor to cultivate a new life form. It's an incredibly efficient strategy, one that lets the Boros clan swell its ranks and strength almost overnight. But Boros himself shrank from the idea of raising heirs. He lived for battle, for the pure exhilaration of pitting his strength against worthy opponents. To him, legacy wasn't in offspring, but in the eternal echo of his power on the battlefield. With such confidence in his own might and the Boros family's unshakable security, he felt no need to start a bloodline. His victories, he believed, would carry his name forward for all time. Their vitality is astonishing. So long as they have enough energy, they simply refuse to die. This incredible resilience has made the Boros clan virtually fearless across the universe, able to thrive in any environment. And since the Boros line shows no signs of extinction, there's no urgent need for Ethan to start propagating their bloodline himself. Procreation can be left to the Boros. His real passion lies in conflict. After all, mutants infused with Boros's unique abilities are exceedingly rare. Ethan understood this better than anyone. Ordinary Boros, often dismissed as the Cyclopean aliens, don't possess the same overwhelming power that Lord Boros wields. So he extracted the most potent fragments of Boros's genome and used them to engineer a cadre of Boros isotopes. With these genetically tailored warriors at his command, Ethan could indulge his thirst for battle without jeopardizing the original lineage of the Boros family. Ethan surveyed the assembled Cyclops and turned to Poros. "Starting today, they're your responsibility." Poros met his gaze without hesitation. These weren't ordinary clan members, but combat Cyclops, each carrying a unique mutant gene. Their power levels averaged dragon or higher, none dipped below that threshold. "I understand," Poros replied. Ethan nodded. Keep in mind, these Cyclops aren't like the rest of your race. I created them by combining specialized mutant fragments with your own genetic code. Like you, they're exceptional, far beyond ordinary Cyclops. You could call their potential limitless. Train them as you see fit. Who knows, one might even become a rival strong enough to truly challenge you. Porus's pulse quickened at Ethan's words. A genuine rival, someone who could match his strength, was exactly what he craved. Only by facing worthy opponents could he push beyond his limits. He studied the row of newborn, one-eyed warriors before him, anticipation and excitement surging through his veins. A mutant as exceptional as myself? He couldn't wait to find out. Ethan strode into the Venusian court with unshakable confidence, convinced he was unlike anyone the Empire had ever seen. At his side marched half a dozen one-eyed children, their ragged clothes and haunted expressions casting them as refugees in the eyes of the onlookers. Yet the moment Ethan unleashed a fraction of his power, every assumption shattered. He was no displaced exile, but Ethan, the Imperial War Master personally appointed by the Emperor himself. In that role, he wielded the Empire's supreme military authority, second only to the Emperor, and commanded its armies without question. Titles, however, were of little interest to him. Real power lay in action. Over the following weeks, Ethan set to work transforming those young Cyclopes into a crack-fighting force. He drilled them in devastating combat techniques, forged their wills against every hardship, and challenged them to push past their limits. Every morning began before dawn. Every evening ended long after dusk. All the while, he watched them carefully, searching for a prodigy capable of matching his strength. And under his exacting tutelage, the children grew stronger, braver, more disciplined than anyone had believed possible. When Ethan at last deemed his task complete, he slipped back through the dimensional rift to the world of One Punch Man. Even as he returned to familiar streets, a chill ran down his spine. From somewhere beyond his own reality, somewhere in the vast reaches of the Marvel Universe, unseen eyes were tracking his every move. Ethan felt a familiar stirring inside him, an unease he'd sensed before but never named. Now he understood. It was the gaze of the One Above All, OAA. When he had defied Marvel's power, the OAA had been unable to prevent his escape through time. He'd always assumed the OA's influence was absolute, but in truth it could only touch him through the very power he wielded. Without his consent, it could destroy him, but it could never bind him. The same was true of the Supreme God. Recognizing Ethan's miraculous potential, the Supreme God had generously entrusted his Archangel with extraordinary power, not to control Ethan, but to preserve his extraordinary lineage. When Ethan reappeared, Esdeath let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She had feared he might grow weary of their world and never come back. Rushing to his side, she bowed her head. "Master," she said softly, "I want to become stronger." She could no longer bear her own limitations. Against titans like Saitama, Boros, and even the Hell Tornado, her strength had proven insufficient. Though her Time Freeze and Feng Shui Life and Death Fist could stall the Hell Tornado's assault, its raw power still threatened to overwhelm her. But with Ethan returned, and armed with new insight, Esdeath vowed she would transcend her weaknesses once and for all. Esdeath's telekinetic barrier glowed around her, an impervious shield, even as Ethan froze time with a thought. His most powerful explos, ions had failed to crack it. She was simply outclassed. In a straight fight here, her ice mastery, supreme in the One Punch Man world, counted for nothing. Ethan studied her calmly. "Do you want to get stronger?" The general's ice-blue eyes narrowed. In that silent moment, she weighed her pride against his challenge, then inclined her head. "I do." "Good." Without an edge, she'd be nothing more than a beautiful footnote on some higher plane of battle. Ethan tapped his wrist communicator. The air shimmered and split, and a woman stepped through the rift. Android 18. Most fighters balked at entering his Shura field. Its murderous aura drove them back. But Android 18 was different. She walked in as if stepping onto a familiar battlefield, unflinching under the oppressive hum of latent energy. Esdeath's gaze flicked from Ethan to the newcomer. She took in 18's cropped blonde hair, her flawless, almost delicate features, and saw the steel within. "Who is she?" Esdeath asked, voice like frost. "Android 18, Ethan replied. "A warrior from another universe. I want her to test you, push you beyond your limits. 18's cool eyes met Esdeath's icicle stare, and a flicker of challenge ignited between them. In that charged moment, the two champions sized each other up, primed to shatter barriers and discover who would emerge stronger from the crucible of combat. Freckles might be common enough on a passerby, but they're still striking when you see them. In the same way, there was a fierce, almost feral glint between her brows and in her eyes, something you never find in an ordinary woman. Esdeath smiled. Master, in other worlds, is she your slave? Ethan nodded. Technically, Dr. Groh had designated number 18 as his follower, but in practice, she was little more than a slave, though Ethan himself never treated her that way. I'm not your slave. No, 18 protested, her pride warring with her duty. Ethan held up a hand. If you don't like slave, call me whatever you prefer, a subordinate, an assistant, anything but what you just said. No, she snapped, bristling. Absolutely not. She scowled, but there was no real argument left in her. Fine, whatever. Ethan laughed softly. He wasn't one to hold a grudge. Turning back to Esdeath, he added, Master, I know I'm not enough for you. How about joining the nobles in some multiplayer games tonight? Esdeath leaned against him, her expression curious. Don't underestimate number 18, she said. Not even Boros or Saitama could stand against her. If she ever lost her temper, she could obliterate both the Earth and the Moon. Chapter X, The Promise of Chi. Ethan leaned back, his tone remarkably calm for someone speaking of cosmic devastation. It might stretch belief to destroy an entire solar system, he said, but leveling a single planet, that's as simple as taking a life. Esdeath's heart pounded so violently she nearly stumbled. Could he truly be more powerful than Boros, or even Saitama? She struggled to steady her racing thoughts as Ethan's lips curled into a confident smile. But there's more, he continued. I've arranged for someone to train you, number 18. She will teach you to wield a force far greater than any you've mastered so far, Chi. Esdeath's eyes flashed with excitement. Chi? With it, how strong will I become? That question eclipsed everything else. Whether number 18 obeyed willingly or not mattered little. A warrior capable of bending her to his will had to be extraordinary. Ethan nodded, his expression serious. With your innate talent and drive, there's no reason you couldn't surpass number 18 herself. A surge of exhilaration coursed through Esdeath. Surpass number 18? She had no doubt she could achieve it, if only she had the power and the technique. She met Ethan's gaze without hesitation. Master, she said, voice steady and determined, why not teach me yourself? Ethan chuckled softly, the air around them vibrating with unspoken possibilities. In that moment, Esdeath knew her life was about to change forever. Ethan leaned back casually, arms folded, and shook his head. I'm not going to teach you. Esdeath froze, genuinely taken aback. In her world, she was always the strongest. No one had ever dared refuse her before, much less refuse so flatly, and yet Ethan's tone carried no mockery, just plain honesty. Standing nearby, number 18 burst into laughter. She'd always found Ethan brusque, but seeing him turn down Esdeath so plainly was downright delightful. Striding closer, she gave Esdeath a sideways glance, voice dripping with challenge. Mastering Chi isn't a stroll in the park. Her words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown at Esdeath's feet. But the Ice Commander's expression only grew colder, a confident smirk teasing the corners of her lips. You underestimate me, she replied coolly. If I set my mind to something, I achieve it, no matter how difficult. She drew herself up, radiating the resolute confidence that had earned her a fearsome reputation on countless battlefields. Ethan remained impassive, number 18 still smiling, and for a moment the three of them stood in tense silence, each convinced that, in the end, only one vision of power would reign supreme. Esdeath was convinced that nothing in this world could stump her. She'd already mastered the otherworldly powers at her fingertips. When she made that claim aloud, number 18 arched a single eyebrow and said coolly, Oh, really? If you can't learn it, I'm not teaching you. I refuse to waste time on a slow student. She glanced at Ethan as if asking whether he agreed. Ethan merely shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. It's up to you how you teach. As long as she absorbs the lessons, you're free to handle things however you see fit. Number 18 blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected Ethan to hand her such carte blanche, and she couldn't deny it thrilled her. His endorsement meant she could push Esdeath exactly as she pleased. A spark of excitement lit her eyes. Esdeath, observing their exchange, felt a twinge of uncertainty. Why was Ethan so relaxed about this? Didn't he worry number 18 might deliberately set her up to fail? Ethan must have noticed the doubt flickering across Esdeath's face, because he gave her a reassuring grin. "You two will work well together," he said gently. "I trust number 18's approach. Ethan will teach you chi." With that, Ethan turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Esdeath and number 18 standing awkwardly in the clearing, each wondering what would happen next. Number 18 cleared her throat. "All right, let's make a deal. I'll show you how to sense the shifts of chi first." Esdeath regarded her with a flicker of caution, but her confidence didn't waver. She believed she could master chi, no matter how foreign the concept. "Very well," she said. "Teach me." Number 18 stepped closer and faced her squarely. To cultivate chi, the first step is to learn how to feel it within your body. Esdeath tilted her head, skepticism and curiosity warring in her expression. "Feel chi? Do I even have any?" "Of course," number 18 replied, her eyes serious. "Everything in the world is made of chi. Yours is simply different. It's cold and hard, like ice, which makes it tricky to guide." She reached out and gently placed her hand over Esdeath's chest. Esdeath flinched at the unexpected contact, but stood her ground. "Close your eyes and breathe deeply," number 18 in a soft voice. "Focus on the subtle currents beneath your skin. Inhale slowly and exhale." Esdeath obeyed, her chest rising and falling in a deliberate rhythm. At first, she felt nothing, but then a faint tingle, like a distant chill, began to stir beneath her ribs. Her eyebrows drew together. "There," she whispered. "That cold? Is that chi?" "Acknowledging it is the crucial first step," number 18 said, nodding. "Now imagine that chill pooling at the center of your chest. Let your breath shape its boundary. Control it. Do not let it overwhelm you." Esdeath concentrated, and for a moment the air around her seemed to shimmer. A pale, icy glow flickered at her core, then receded as she exhaled. She opened her eyes, a small smile forming. "I felt it." Number 18 withdrew her hand and allowed a satisfied smile to play at her lips. "Good, that is your first glimpse of chi. From here, we will refine your senses and learn to direct it. The path won't be easy, but I will guide you every step of the way." Esdeath bowed her head once in gratitude. "Thank you, I'm ready." As the afternoon sun slanted through the pines, the two began their first lesson in earnest, Ethan's promise of hidden power unfolding before them. Ethan closed his eyes and took a steady breath, then placed his hands lightly on Esdeath's shoulders. "Focus on your breathing," he instructed, his voice calm and measured. "Feel every rise and fall of your chest. At the same time, pay attention to the air moving around you." Esdeath frowned at first, uncertain how to sense something so subtle and unseen. Ethan reached out with his own energy, gently guiding her awareness toward the invisible currents that drifted through the air. Gradually, Esdeath began to feel it, a faint, tingling presence brushing against her skin, as if a gentle breeze were swirling around her limbs. Encouraged, she poured more concentration into the exercise. With each inhale, she detected the soft pressure of chi gathering at her core. With each exhale, she felt it flowing outward in delicate streams. As minutes passed, her sensitivity sharpened. She could now steer the currents, directing them left or right, up or down, as easily as waving a hand through water. A rush of excitement surged through her. This was no mere trick of the mind. She was truly perceiving and wielding chi. A deep satisfaction settled in her chest. She had made her first real breakthrough. Ethan opened his eyes and smiled with genuine surprise. "Not bad," he said. "You felt it perfectly. This is chi." Esdeath lifted her hand and stared in awe at the thin, sapphire tendrils spiraling around her fingers. The air shimmered with energy, and she knew that, under Ethan's guidance, she had taken her first step on the path of mastery. Ethan stood in the training hall, recalling the ancient diagrams of the feng shui life and death fist. The sensation of chi swirling inside him was all too real now, and far more powerful than any textbook description. But mastering his own chi was only the beginning. There was a second crucial lesson ahead. No 18 watched him calmly. As an android, she manipulated her chi effortlessly. For Ethan, raw strength had always come easy, but finesse was entirely new. She stepped forward, Feeling your own chi was the first step, she reminded him. Now you must learn to sense the chi of others. Ethan frowned. You mean sense their emotions? Exactly, No 18 said. Anger, joy, fear, all of these states create ripples in one's chi field. Living beings are full of it. Mechanical or inanimate objects are more difficult, but people are simpler. He closed his eyes and drew his awareness inward, following the breathing pattern she'd taught him. Gradually, he felt it, a dozen faint pulses drifting through the air around him. A fellow student practicing a form in the corner. A stray cat lurking by the doorway. Their chi signatures were weak compared to his own, but unmistakable. Encouraged, Ethan reached farther, to the spot where number 18 stood. But there was nothing. No pulse, no vibration. His focus sharpened, but the emptiness remained. Opening his eyes, he met her gaze. I can sense everyone else's chi, but not yours. Why? No 18's lips curved into a knowing smile. That, Ethan, is a question you'll need to answer for yourself. Because I'm an android, you can't sense my energy, number 18 drawled. Esdeath cocked her head, brow furrowed. Android? What exactly is that? None of your concern, 18 replied dismissively. You should learn to master your anger before asking questions. Esdeath's eyes gleamed with interest. Very well. When you've grown stronger, I expect you to tell me everything. Is that so? Esdeath echoed, a confident smile playing, gras on her lips. I look forward to it, and I hope you can deliver. Number 18's lips curved into a faint, inscrutable smile. She found it hard to believe Esdeath could ever match her prowess. After all, androids were simply too formidable in combat. Chapter 509, Saitama. Here comes another fierce one. From that day on, Esdeath threw herself into cultivating her chi with renewed zeal. She constantly probed her limits, pushing herself to sense ever-distant and more powerful auras. Over time, her perceptive ability sharpened. She could detect energies from farther away and even gauge the relative strength of each person's aura. This progress thrilled her, and only strengthened her resolve. Just when she believed she'd mastered aura sensing, an astonishing revelation struck. While she trained one afternoon, a colossal presence suddenly washed over her. An aura so immense it draped the sky in shadow, filling her with a profound sense of despair. In an instant, Esdeath recognized it, Ethan's aura. She felt the sheer force of his power and knew how vast the gulf remained between them. Yet instead of shrinking back, her determination flared. This only proved she had more to learn, and more reason to persevere until she could stand toe-to-toe with him. You must be trembling, Android 18 remarked, a playful edge to her voice. That overwhelming pressure is Ethan's wrath. Esdeath tilted her head, brow furrowed. Then, where is Saitama's anger? A hush settled. Esdeath searched the skies, but there was no trace of Saitama's aura. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her features as she wondered why she could not sense his true power. Who is Saitama? Number 18 asked, her curiosity sparked. She remembered that when she first arrived, Ethan had boasted she was stronger than both Boros and Saitama. Esdeath's eyes widened. She'd already faced Boros and deemed him little more than a nuisance, but Saitama was someone she spoke of again and again. Ethan says Saitama is the most powerful being alive, bar none, 18 went on, tilting her head. Of course, once Ethan makes his appearance, he'll be the strongest of all. Esdeath laughed, sharp and dismissive. That's preposterous. If you really believed that, you've never encountered true power. Number 18 merely smiled. In my world, power is everywhere. Dr. Gru's artificial humans have crushed every opponent they've faced, and those creations have only grown stronger. I don't know how advanced they are now, but I'm certain their strength eclipses mine. She let her words hang in the air. So tell me, do you doubt Ethan's claim? Esdeath leaned forward, her interest evident. She could not sense an ounce of chi from 18, and the idea of meeting someone who might rival even Boros thrilled her. I want to see this Saitama for myself, she said, eager. 18 regarded her coolly, making no move to explain further. Finally, she smirked and folded her arms. Very well, I'll take you to Saitama. Esdeath's voice rang out like a challenge. If you can defeat him, I will admit defeat. Android 18 crossed her arms, utterly unfazed. I'm not interested. Esdeath's eyes narrowed. Then you're afraid? This juvenile provocation doesn't bother me, 18 replied coolly. Esdeath blinked in surprise. She'd expected at least a spark of anger or eagerness, but 18 remained perfectly composed. To Esdeath, a true warrior should crave the fight. 18's indifference both puzzled and intrigued her. Determined, Esdeath pressed on. You're strong, 18. I know that. But Saitama, you can't imagine his power. His strength and speed are unrivaled. He could defeat you effortlessly. For a moment, 18 frowned. It wasn't that she lacked pride or competitiveness, she simply found the whole thing tedious. Still, she recognized an opportunity to teach Esdeath a lesson about true power. All right, she said at last, lead the way. Following directions Ethan had given her, Esdeath escorted 18 through the city streets to a small, unassuming supermarket. Inside, Saitama, the bald hero of legend, was bent over a display of sale produce, carefully selecting the ripest vegetables. 18 peered at him. That's the Saitama you were talking about? Esdeath nodded, a gleam of excitement in her eyes. The one and only. Standing side by side in the fluorescent light of the grocery aisle, the two women regarded the oblivious hero. A challenge hung in the air, one that would soon be accepted. 18 stood frozen, staring at the unremarkable man before her. Could Esdeath really be serious? That's Saitama? Esdeath smiled, her azure eyes glittering. Yes, don't let his plain appearance fool you. He's far more powerful than you could ever imagine. Suddenly, Esdeath called out, Saitama! Saitama turned to see who was summoning him. I'm kind of in the middle of something here. Esdeath's lips curved into a teasing grin. How about a little incentive? Defeat her in combat, and I'll treat you to a feast. At the word feast, Saitama's eyes lit up. Did you say feast? 18's pupils constricted. She glanced between Esdeath and Saitama, suspicion and curiosity warring in her expression. Miss Esdeath, what are you planning? Esdeath's voice was calm. I'll offer him 1 million yen if he wins. He can eat as much as he likes. 1 million yen? Saitama's excitement was palpable. He turned to 18. If you lose, you get nothing. 18 squared her shoulders. Fine. When do we start? Saitama didn't hesitate. Right now. Let's move to the clearing. With hands shoved into her pockets, 18 followed Saitama across the pavilion's wooden floor. Esdeath trailed behind, her eyes shining with cold delight. In moments, they reached a wide-open clearing, bathed in afternoon light, an improvised arena for a showdown none of them would soon forget. Right here? Saitama, uneasy about the collateral damage, suggested they relocate. Android 18 nodded, and moments later, they stood at the edge of the massive crater carved out by his sparring match with Genos. Jagged cliffs of shattered rock rose all around them. Bring it on, 18 called, cracking her knuckles. Saitama gave a confident grin. He was almost certain he couldn't lose, so long as he wasn't facing someone like Ethan, a true monster among monsters. Even though 18 had greeted him brusquely, her blindingly fast strike moments ago proved she was no ordinary android. And to top it off, she just unleashed that punch with chi. Androids typically rely on reinforced flesh and cybernetics to stand against Super Saiyans. Mystical energy like chi is almost unheard of in their kind. The fusion of cutting-edge biotech and ki control was staggering. And remember, this was the original Android 18, not a copy. Who could guess what enhancements she'd secretly received? Sun Wukong himself once had to channel chi into his fingertips just to snatch Trunks' blade, and even then, the sword shattered. Now 18 was willingly wielding chi, which spoke volumes about how seriously she took Saitama. Granted, she'd never witnessed a genuine Super Saiyan, but she clearly wasn't underestimating him. Boom! The roar of the impact filled the air before Saitama even knew what hit him. An impossibly powerful punch struck him square on the jaw, and the world went white as he crumpled to the floor, stars dancing behind his eyelids. Android 18 brushed her fist clean, quirking an eyebrow in surprise. Huh, that's tougher than I expected. I'd pegged Saitama for a boiled egg, hard on the outside, but soft inside. This felt more like striking unyielding rock. After a moment, Saitama staggered to his feet, his face already swelling where the blow landed. Esdeath watched silently from the sidelines. She knew just how strong Saitama could be. He'd taken Boros's onslaught with nothing worse than a few dirty clothes. Yet the precision and subtle force behind this strike could only belong to one person, Ethan. For the first time, Saitama's carefree expression snapped into focus. Android 18 was clearly no ordinary opponent. As they squared off, it was impossible to tell who held the upper hand, her or Ethan. Chapter 510. Still updating on New Year's Eve. Show me some love. Number 18, the female android, unleashed a storm of chi-infused strikes that shattered Ethan's expectations. Every punch and kick she threw carved through the air like a blade, rattling the ground beneath their feet. Ethan's fighting style was deceptively simple. He had only punches and kicks in his arsenal. His normal punch, consecutive normal punches, and the infamous serious series of punches each carried boundless power, capable of sundering mountains or tearing holes in space-time. Yet, against an opponent as formidable as number 18, even his most overwhelming blows felt surprisingly muted. The moment the battle erupted, their attacks collided in a deafening explosion. Shockwaves radiated outward, warping the very air around them. They moved so swiftly that onlookers could barely discern their forms, only a blur of afterimages streaking across the sky. Each time their fists and feet met, a concussive blast ripped through the atmosphere, leaving the surrounding space quivering in the aftermath. Here, raw strength met unparalleled speed, and the battlefield itself trembled under the clash of two titanic forces. Ethan felt a sharp sting in his fist, but he didn't flinch. He pressed on. Yet number 18's strength was far beyond anything he had ever faced. The chi she'd poured into her punch instantly dispersed his power, forcing him to skid back several steps. Unfazed, Ethan reset his stance and prepared to strike again. In an instant, number 18 gathered even more chi between her palms. She brought her hands together, and a colossal wave of energy exploded outward, crackling with raw force as though it intended to swallow everything in its path. Ethan's eyes widened at the sheer magnitude of that power. He knew he'd have to unleash his full strength to stand a chance. Drawing in a steady breath, Ethan shifted into his serious strike stance. Moments later, his blow and number 18's energy wave collided in midair with a deafening thunderclap. A shockwave rippled through the battlefield, twisting the very air around them. Their opposing energies blazed like wildfire, illuminating the sky with the ferocity of their clash. In the shattered expanse of the arena, every blow Ethan landed unleashed a violent pulse of energy that rippled through the air as heat and raw momentum. Air molecules rattled under the assault, driving local temperatures skyward and spawning rolling waves of heat that twisted the atmosphere into turbulent eddies. Those roiling currents gave birth to sudden storms and roiling cyclones, while the battle's unleashed power ionized the surrounding air, tearing electrons free from their atoms and forming drifting clouds of charged particles high above. That ionized veil warped the ionosphere, garbling radio transmissions, sputtering satellite links, and throwing navigation systems into chaos. On the ground, the damage was even more catastrophic. Shockwaves buckled the earth, opening jagged fissures and collapsing swaths of terrain, while offshore tremors triggered massive tsunamis. In that moment, Ethan and his adversary stood at the eye of a cataclysmic clash so fierce it seemed poised to tear the world itself apart. The cataclysm unleashed by Ethan's confrontation reached far beyond the battlefield. On a grand scale, fault lines shifted and new ridges and basins formed, permanently redrawing the topography. Groundwater channels were fractured, altering aquifers and undermining the region's long-term water supply. Even the stability of the crust itself was called into question, as the earth settled unevenly along the newly agitated faults. Waves of kinetic force rippled outward like thrown stones across a pond, battering nearby structures and infrastructure. Foundations cracked, bridges quivered, and pipelines ruptured in a chain reaction of devastation. Roads buckled under the stress of aftershocks, and falling masonry turned once solid neighborhoods into rubble fields. At the microscopic level, the battle's energy was no less destructive. Molecula, our bonds, normally held together by predictable electromagnetic forces, were rent apart by the sheer intensity of the clash. Freed atoms and fragments of molecules drifted into the air, colliding with atmospheric gases in a frenzy of unanticipated chemistry. The result was a haze of newly formed compounds, some inert, others highly toxic, threatening both ecological balance and human health. Remarkably, even gravity felt the impact. The surge of raw power and momentum briefly warped the surrounding gravitational field, creating subtle distortions that bent light and shifted the weight of objects in unpredictable ways. In all its manifestations, geological, structural, chemical, and gravitational, Ethan's battle left a scar on the world that would endure long after the combatants had gone their separate ways. Ethan's massive punch tore through the air with such force that it did more than just redirect the incoming attack, it warped the very fabric of space-time around it. On a human scale, the effect was invisible. But at the level of particles and quantum fields, the tiniest ripples radiated outward, subtly shifting trajectories and altering fundamental motions. Back on the ground, the shock waves pulverized the soil, shattering its structure and leaching away nutrients. Where once seeds might have sprouted, nothing now could grow. In the storm of atomic fragments and torn molecules, intense heat flared and reactive gases burst free into the atmosphere. The result was a sudden spike in air pollution and greenhouse warming. Yet the true scale of the battle's devastation became apparent only when the residual energy rippled into deep space. Across light years, gravitational anomalies flickered into being. On distant planets, orbits wobbled. Some worlds drifted ever so slightly off course, plunging entire ecosystems into prolonged winters or torrential monsoons. Civilizations that had never known conflict suddenly faced existential threats from a clash they could not have imagined. Android number 18 watched Ethan and Saitama with a mixture of awe and concern. She raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "You two really don't hold back, do you?" Saitama, as unfazed as ever, merely scratched his head and smiled. Ethan met her gaze, breathing hard but steady. Around them, the very fabric of reality had been tested, and, for better or worse, had held together. No matter how fiercely she struck, Ethan refused to yield. He was like a boulder pounded by endless hammer blows. Each hit only etched new scars into his body without forcing him to his knees. His shirt was plastered with sweat. Jagged lines of bruising marked every inch of his skin, yet his gaze never wavered. He staggered to his feet, every movement radiating agony. "What a fierce battle," he panted, voice strained. Facing Android 18's relentless onslaught felt to him like sailing a tiny skiff through a raging storm, waves crashing from every side, threatening to rip the vessel apart. He couldn't recall ever having absorbed such cruelly precise punches. No, he'd never known pain like this before. With every blow she landed, a searing ache shot from the depths of his core, as if she were trying to shatter every bone in his body. Still, despite the torment, Ethan refused to back down. After all, these were no ordinary blows, but attacks imbued with energy, each one capable of inflicting truly devastating damage. Yet here he stood, battered but unbroken, ready for the next strike. Ethan's health and armor meters both read full, but even that wasn't enough to withstand a critical strike laced with true damage. Gritting his teeth, he roared, "I'm not giving up." Across the arena, Saitama's eyes burned with anticipation. In their steady glow lay his unshakable confidence and the promise of all he hoped to achieve in the battles to come. Chapter 511, The Birth of the Venusians. In that instant, Android 18 felt a sudden, terrifying surge of anger from Saitama. Before now, his energy had been as tranquil as the earth itself, so deep in meditation that even she couldn't detect it. But this new aura was different. It roared like a volcano about to erupt, fierce and scorching, as if it might break free at any moment. Power and passion radiated from him in waves. Startled, 18 watched his energy coil and intensify. Within him, power gathered and transcended, impossible to ignore. An unseen force seemed to cloak Saitama's body, and every punch or kick he threw carried unfathomable destructive power. His movements sharpened, growing faster and more ferocious, as though he intended to swallow the entire battlefield with a single strike. Saitama inhaled deeply and sprang forward. His fist tore through the air, trailing a shockwave like a meteor streaking across a night sky, aimed straight at 18. Unfazed, Android 18 met him head-on. Her fist shot out, colliding with his in midair with a thunderous bang. Ethan watched in awe as a shockwave of pure energy rippled outward, throwing the entire battlefield into turmoil. At the center of that tempest, Saitama's fist met Android 18's blow head-on, and their chi collided in a blinding flash. The force they unleashed seemed to eclipse everything around them. But then, Saitama froze. He sensed something unfamiliar in 18's punch, a strange piercing power he'd never encountered before, as if it could cut straight through his defenses and lodge itself in his flesh. Surprise flickered across his face. This was Android 18's unique ability at work. From the sidelines, Ethan, formerly known as Luther, observed intently. He knew Esdeath had brought 18 here specifically to test Saitama, and he felt like a spectator in a gladiatorial arena. As the smoke cleared and Saitama rose to his feet, Ethan realized the hero before him had changed once more. Saitama's aura had grown stronger. Without any limiter holding him back, every training session he'd ever completed had granted him a permanent +1 to his abilities. Whereas most fighters suffer diminishing returns as their bodies adapt and grow stronger, Saitama's gains remained constant, no matter how trivial the exercise. Yet even knowing how little each workout truly challenged him, Saitama still poured his all into every last rep. The number of sit-ups, push-ups, or squats meant nothing if the feedback he felt in his body continued to surge. And now, as he squared off against Android 18, that feedback was stronger than ever. Ethan's power scale had soared, from +1 to +10, and now it felt like +100. In the heat of battle, he kept shattering his own limits, each breakthrough revealing even more devastating strength. Serious series, continuous serious beating! Saitama loosed a relentless flurry with both fists, each blow more thunderous than the last. Ethan staggered under the onslaught as Android 18 stepped forward, her eyes cold with calculation. She drew in a deep breath and fashioned her ki into a compact orb at her palm. Super compression cannon. This technique was Ethan's own invention, the Qigong wave. By pressurizing his life energy into a dense, fist-sized sphere, he had found a way to concentrate explosive force far beyond its normal limits. In Android 18's hands, that tiny orb crackled with enough power to pierce the entire solar system. Imagine a blow so focused that it slices clean through planets without obliterating them. Ethan had originally dreamed of evolving the Qigong wave into a cascading storm, one powerful enough to dismantle an enemy's attack at the molecular level. But the level of control required proved beyond him. Ki might bend to the wielder's will in theory, yet sustaining that kind of precision was a hurdle he hadn't yet cleared. Now, as 18 unleashed the super compression cannon, the ground beneath them quaked, and the air itself seemed to ripple in protest. Ethan braced himself, determination flaring in his eyes. This was another limit waiting to be broken. A blinding beam of condensed energy, a super compression cannon tore across the battlefield. Saitama unleashed a flurry of punches that shredded the chi wave as it came, but the gap in raw power was simply too vast. The cannon hit him squarely, and in an instant, he disintegrated into nothing but ash. Android 18's eyes went wide. Even she hadn't expected her shot to be that devastating. Esdeath, standing nearby, staggered back in shock. He died? It can't be, Android 18 whispered, her voice trembling. Then Ethan appeared. With a motion of his hand, the rippling field of distorted time reformed and spread outward until it blanketed the entire planet, sweeping history backward. In a flash, Saitama rematerialized at full strength, exactly as he'd been before the blast, yet the memory of being vaporized by Android 18's cannon remained vivid in his mind. Incredible power, he muttered to himself, running a hand over his bald head. Yet instead of fear, a surge of excitement coursed through him. The knowledge that someone, let alone two someones, could actually kill him was the greatest thrill he'd ever felt. It ignited a fierce determination to grow even stronger. After all these years of solitary training, he finally faced opponents capable of besting him. Could anyone stay calm, knowing they'd just been wiped out, and might be again? Android 18 shook her head in disbelief. How are you so calm about this? You're so weird. Esdeath folded her arms, eyes narrowed, and he didn't even use chi to defend himself. Without it, he's already this powerful. Imagine what he could do if he learned chi techniques of his own. Ethan watched Saitama coolly. I have no interest in teaching you chi, he said. He wasn't belittling it. Chi may seem subtle, but it's one of the universe's purest energies, effortless to learn, intuitive to wield, and capable of transformative power. Still, Saitama had little reason for resentment. With his raw potential, he could one day push beyond this universe's limits, or even shatter them. Without another word, Saitama turned and walked away. His wounds closed on their own as he moved, no outside aid required. Ethan simply observed the retreating figure, a calculating expression on his face. "He's practically indestructible," Ethan murmured. "Regenerates faster than anything I've ever seen. If I could replicate his state, strip away every limiter and integrate it into a new lineage." He paused, envisioning the possibilities. Humans who mirror Saitama's physiology, but without any cap on their growth. Let's call them Venusians. They'd look just like us, but every one of them could train endlessly and become ever stronger. A whole army of unstoppable super-earthlings. They might even come to dominate the Marvel Universe. Ethan's lips curved into a thoughtful smile. The idea was absurdly dangerous and intoxicating, and he was already planning how to make it a reality. Ethan stepped back, surveying his latest creations. Without the usual evolutionary limiters in place, these beings wouldn't spiral out of control like Doomsday. They'd remain stable no matter how much power they amassed. He reminded himself that, though Saitama's arrival in this universe felt like a miracle, it was simply a pattern he could replicate, and he didn't even need the power gem to do it. In a soft cascade of light, 100 Venusians, men, women, elders, and youths, materialized before him. Their bodies bore the randomized genetic markers of the local population, flawlessly merged with his own limiter-free design. Each one sported a full head of hair, an immediate visual contrast to Saitama's baldness, and perfect poreless skin that gleamed under the lab's lights. "Your Majesty," they intoned in unison, a programmed greeting embedded into their newly minted memories. Ethan allowed himself a small smile. "You're all ordinary flesh and blood for now," he told them. "But once you return, you will train without mercy until you've unlocked your true potential." With a final nod, he opened a swirling portal to the Marvel Universe. One by one, the 100 Venusians stepped through, ready to take their place in the battles to come. Even Kryptonians like Superman and the Saiyans have faced the horror of being stripped of their powers, reduced to nothing more than ordinary human strength, vulnerable to any foe. But the Venusians are different. They only need to train hard to grow stronger, and once they ascend to a new level, they never slip back. Their power doesn't fade from laziness or vanish for any reason. Observing Saitama in action makes that clear. His daily life isn't disrupted by his strength. He won't punch the planet to bits when his alarm clock rings. He simply smashes the alarm with perfect precision. It's a flawless, universal ability. Over the following days, Esdeath devoted herself entirely to training with Number 18. After witnessing the android's overwhelming power, her own hunger to improve grew more intense than ever. "Ha!" she shouted, channeling a potent aura between her palms. With every deliberate movement, the invisible energy within her began to flow and swirl. This was the long-dormant chi finally awakening inside her body. Deep within her, a vast power lay sleeping like a dormant dragon, waiting for the moment to awaken. Under Esdeath's precise guidance, that slumbering force began to stir, its darkness dissolving like night at dawn. Sitting perfectly still, Esdeath closed her eyes and traced the pathways of her life energy with silent invocations. Her hands moved gracefully, as if playing an invisible piano. At her command, the energy, chi, slithered through her meridians like a lithe serpent, growing more vibrant with every heartbeat. Minutes passed. She felt her body grow lighter, invigorated by the swell of power rising within her. It poured through her veins like water bursting from a mountain spring, filling every fiber of her being. Esdeath adjusted her breathing, coaxing the chi to obey her will. In a soft, rhythmic murmur, she guided its flow, weaving it into the wellspring of her strength. Every subtle gesture mattered. She modulated her breath, shifted her posture, and spoke to the energy as though it were a living partner. Under her careful direction, the chi blossomed into its fullest, most potent form. At the peak of that surging power, Esdeath's eyes snapped open. With a decisive exhale, she thrust her palms forward, and the once dormant dragon within roared fully awake. In an instant, an icy blue beam of energy sprang from between Esdeath's hands, slicing through the sky like a razor-sharp sword and driving straight into the mountain before her. The impact shattered the silence with thunderous booms that echoed off every cliff face. Boom, 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 as if the very heavens and earth were trembling beneath her power. Under the relentless assault of that frigid laser, the mountain quaked violently. Boulders and cascades of earth broke loose from the peak, tumbling down in a tumbling avalanche that threatened to bury the entire valley. Esdeath stood firm, feeling the vibrations rumble through her bones, and allowed a satisfied smile to play across her lips. She had done it. She had mastered her energy. No longer a dormant force slumbering within, it was now a weapon she could summon at will, wherever and whenever she chose. As the power coursed through her, she sensed not only its overwhelming might, but also a deep, intimate harmony with it. She and the energy were one, each subtle shift and surge crystal clear in her mind. That exhilarating fusion of self and power filled her with an intoxicating thrill and an unshakable satisfaction. Ethan stood perfectly still, letting the new surge of chi roll through him. It was unlike anything he had ever felt, more potent, more refined. A mere 1% of this power could have obliterated his former self. This wasn't a simple 100-fold improvement. It felt as if he were now standing at the very summit of strength. He raised his hands and shaped the chi into a crackling wave. With a thought, the energy shot forward, twisting and roaring like a living thing. It was only a basic chi strike, but even this primitive form carried overwhelming force. "Not bad," called number 18 from a nearby cliff, arms folded across his chest. But that was just the most elementary application of chi. Ethan turned and offered a grateful smile. "Thanks for your guidance, No. 18. "No thanks needed," No. 18 replied proudly. "You earned every bit of this power yourself." In truth, No. 18 hardly felt he had done anything, yet he couldn't hide his pride. He descended the rocky slope and stood beside Ethan. Now comes the next lesson, the art of chi transmutation. He lifted a hand, shaping a mode of energy in midair. Sensing chi, cultivating chi, and deploying chi in attacks are three distinct stages. You've already learned to sense energy within yourself and to vie it as a weapon. The third stage, transmutation, will let you reshape chi into entirely new forms. Ethan's eyes shone with anticipation. "I'm ready. Teach me." Chapter X. The True Art of Qigong. Ethan stood amid the charred remnants of the training field, his mind racing as he surveyed the destruction. To a master like Tao Bai, all those spectacular displays, roiling whirlwinds, phantom blades, tidal surges, were little more than elaborate stages in chi cultivation. The only genuine method of channeling chi into pure offensive power was the most primitive technique of all, the Dong-Dong wave. But the Dong-Dong wave carried a fatal flaw. As the earliest form of Qigong blast, it never really exploded. Its energy spread outward diffusely, failing to concentrate into a decisive, detonating core. Witness Esdeath's cataclysmic strike. Mountains crumbled, the earth split wide, and it looked as if the world itself might tear apart. Yet beneath that spectacle, most of her power was squandered. It was much like a nuclear explosion that scatters its energy in all directions, rather than focusing it for maximum effect. If that same yield were confined and ignited in a single, tightly formed beam, even an untested boy could, in theory, sink an entire island nation. What set truly great fighters apart was their ability to gather every ounce of chi and unleash it with absolute precision. Goku's signature technique, the Kamehameha, exemplifies this principle. By siphoning all available chi into one concentrated blast, he transforms raw energy into a surgical strike. And don't be misled into thinking the increase is merely incremental. A twofold surge in output can determine a battle's outcome. Ethan recalled the data from Wukong's last test. At a base combat rating of 416, Sun Wukong fired a Kamehameha that registered at 924, an amplification factor of about 2.22. Later, when Wukong's power climbed to 8,000, he combined the Kamehameha with a triple Kaioken multiplier to face Vegeta in one of the fiercest confrontations Ethan had ever studied. That clash proved the same lesson yet again. In Qigong warfare, the secret isn't raw extravagance, but the ruthless concentration of power into a single decisive blow. At this moment, Ethan's battle power registers at 53,280. Vegeta's afterburner cannon can match that figure. No wind-up needed, yet capable of inflicting devastating damage. Records show that Vegeta and Sun Wukong squared off at 3 times Kaioken, so the afterburner cannon's power multiplier hovers around 3, even edging out the Kamehameha. When Vegeta unleashes his Gallic gun, his battle power spikes to 24,000, up from his usual 18,000. Esdeath's recent attack looked apocalyptic, but she wasted roughly 70% of its potential. Had she channeled it to full strength, she wouldn't have just blown apart a mountain. She would have cleaved it in two and flooded the entire valley below. That's why it makes perfect sense to deploy the super compression cannon, the specialized weapon Ethan developed at the 18th summit. Its basic compression cannon mode magnifies energy 5.5 times, on par with Sun Wukong's 5 times Kaioken, yet it delivers all that force in a single, bone-shattering blast. Chapter 13. Super as Death. What exactly does a 5.5 times power multiplier entail on the battlefield? In Dragon Ball terms, when one combatant is twice as strong as another, a single hefty blast can finish the job. At 5 times the opponent's strength, even a mundane strike becomes instantly fatal, and once you exceed 10 times their power, any attack, no matter how light, will suffice. That's why Ethan's new compression cannon, operating at 5.5 times output, is such a game-changer for his forces. With that boost, his troops can overturn any engagement in seconds. One slip, and the enemy is obliterated before they even realize what hit them. And if that weren't enough, Android 18's upgraded super compression cannon cranks the multiplier all the way up to 10 times, putting virtually every foe in mortal peril the moment she fires. But Ethan didn't stop at raw firepower. He also shared a chi-based technique with Esdeath, an art he devised back when he was merely experimenting, long before he ever merged with Broly's genes or achieved Super Saiyan. Even in that early stage, he'd studied both the mimic Super Saiyan concept and the legendary King Fist style. By combining those ideas with his own prodigious intellect, he crafted a brand new method of channeling chi. Now, empowered by Ethan's innovation and Android 18's firepower, Esdeath herself stands poised to become the ultimate Super Esdeath. King Fist is a technique that temporarily multiplies every aspect of a fighter's abilities: strength, speed, attack power, and defense by several times, even dozens of times over. With enough practice, a martial artist can steadily raise the threshold of what their body can endure. Unlike a direct offensive maneuver, King Fist simply turbocharges the user's physical attributes. Dragon Ball fans will recognize a familiar precedent. When Son Goku used Kaioken against Frieza in the original manga, he pushed the boost to 10 times his normal power, though in the anime adaptation, he stopped at only 20. In the feature film Super Saiyan Son Goku, he even borrowed Piccolo's energy to hit Kaioken 100. Later, during his fight with Paikuhan, he debuted Super Kaioken while already transformed into a Super Saiyan. All of these examples illustrate how instantaneous bursts of power can turn the tide of battle at great cost. Overdo it, and your body simply gives out. Most humans would collapse under Kaioken's strain far before reaching their breaking point. Bones would shatter, muscle tissue would tear, organs would fail. That's why it's considered one of martial arts' most dangerous gambits. Yet for Ethan, it's a different story. As a Kryptonian, his physiology is leagues beyond ordinary mortality. His muscle fibers are denser, his bone structure stronger, and his internal organs tougher than anything found on Earth. In short, his body can take punishments and dish them out that would leave even the hardiest human warrior in ruins. When Ethan activates King Fist, the air around him seems to bend under the sheer force of his will. Every punch cuts through space with breathtaking velocity, as if reality itself cannot keep pace. For a brief, brilliant moment, he becomes a living weapon, capable of feats that border on the superhuman. Then, as quickly as it flares, the power subsides, leaving him standing but fully intact, while lesser fighters lie broken on the battlefield. That is King Fist in its purest form, a forbidden shortcut to godlike prowess, and a reminder that ultimate power always carries the risk of ultimate cost. But for Ethan, the risk is one he's uniquely equipped to handle. Ethan's Kryptonian physiology allowed him to master the overloaded combat technique almost effortlessly, and then push it even further. Drawing inspiration from the legendary King Fist, he developed his own super mode, a fighting state that not only amplifies strength, speed, and attack power, but also reinforces the entire body in an instant. Where the King Fist focuses largely on raw offense, Ethan's super mode delivers balanced, all-around enhancement, perfectly calibrated to his unique alien constitution. Esdeath, too, has proven herself a prodigy. In less than a month, she's learned to sense, cultivate, and unleash chi. Now she's tackling the compression cannon and super mode in tandem, and her progress is nothing short of remarkable. "Double super mode," she shouted, palms sweeping outward. A pale, ethereal glow coalesced around her form, not merely the flash of unleashed energy, but the visible swell of her internal chi as it surged outward, fortifying her body and heralding a new level of power. Esdeath's entire being seemed to hum with barely contained power. Each breath she drew rippled through the air itself, her muscles coiling like springs ready to snap. In this transcendent state, her strength, speed, and resilience had all been amplified to near mythic proportions. With every strike, she rent the atmosphere asunder, unleashing sonic booms that reverberated across the battlefield. She moved so swiftly she appeared as nothing more than a streak of lightning, impossible to anticipate, impossible to evade. And while her offense was overwhelming, her defense was equally impregnable. Every blow that should have hurt her fell away like water off a shield. Her eyes, once lively with cruelty, now shone with icy focus. Nothing on the field escaped her notice. Each of her motions flowed seamlessly into the next, as though she'd preordained every attack and parry down to the smallest millisecond. In this heightened state, her mind was as keen as a razor, fully attuned to the subtlest shifts in her opponent's posture or intent. It was more than raw power. It was the perfect harmony of thought and body. She had become a war machine, yet retained the supple grace of a living fighter. Every movement projected both lethal force and uncanny beauty, leaving all who watched both awestruck and fearful. However, this superform is not without its price. Every time Esdeath taps into it, her body groans under the strain, her muscles and bones forced to endure multiple times their normal load, her heart hammering like a war drum just to pump enough blood and oxygen. She must wield this power sparingly. One wrong move, and the damage could become irreversible. Then, slicing through the charged air like a voiceover, a single phrase erupts in English: Super Esdeath. The unexpected words pull Esdeath out of her reverie. She whirls on Ethan, irritation and disbelief dancing in her eyes. "Master," she snaps, "are you teasing me?" Ethan leans against a shattered column, a self-satisfied grin on his face. "I wanted something more exciting than full power, and super mode just sounded cooler. It's like picking Super Vegeta over Wukong's full-blown release, so much more theatrical." Esdeath's lips twitch in a reluctant smile, though her brow remains furrowed. "I'll give you drama," she mutters, but there's a spark of pride in her gaze. "I've never felt stronger." Ethan's eyes light up. He steps closer, voice low but eager. "Then tell me, think you could take on Saitama in this form?" Esdeath straightens, power rippling beneath her skin. A fierce grin spreads across her face. "With this strength, I'd welcome the challenge." After measuring her own strength, Esdeath decided there was no point in hunting down Android 18 or Ethan. Saitama was a different story. "Maybe he can defeat Boros," Ethan mused. "Defeat Boros?" Esdeath echoed, eyebrows raised. "He isn't as weak as you think, but if you can master the dual super state, you just might be able to take on Saitama." Ethan smiled confidently. "My super state isn't like the Kaioken, which risks overtaxing the body. It's more like the perfected, full-power Super Saiyan, an adaptive boost that subtly rewrites my ki at the cellular level. It heals and reinforces damaged tissue, driving my strength through the roof. Once you acclimate to that double super state, your baseline power explodes, and as luck would have it, I've found a worthy opponent." Chapter 514, The Birth of the Monster Association. "Who?" Esther asked, her eyes lighting up. She lived for the thrill of battle and couldn't wait to test her strength. Ethan smiled at her eagerness. "Hungry Wolf," he said quietly. "He's said to be on par with Boros." Esther's brow furrowed. "Boros? As in the Conqueror from deep space?" "Exactly." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Strictly speaking, I don't entirely buy it. Boros's meteor burst is notoriously broken in power. Sublight speed strikes, armor that regenerates, the works. Only someone as absurdly strong as Saitama could weather it without flinching. But the rumors insist Hungry Wolf is every bit his match." Esdeath stepped forward at once. "Where is he now?" she demanded. "Not here," Ethan said, smoothing back a lock of hair. "He hasn't fully matured yet." "Hasn't matured?" Esdeath repeated, astonished. "Then how can you claim he rivals Boros?" Ethan gave her a knowing look. "I've done my homework. You remember Monster King Orochi? Ever since he merged with Sykes, his power spiked to true dragon level. That merger effectively rebooted the entire Monster Association. Murata's version is, frankly, all over the place, with new additions and fan service transformations. But beneath the chaos, the foundation is Orochi's reset. He paused, letting the information settle over the room. Esther tapped her foot impatiently. Esdeath frowned, absorbing the contradiction. How do you know Hungry Wolf will achieve such heights? Esdeath pressed. Ethan's lips curved into a sly grin. Because I've been gathering every strange creature from the One Punch Man world into my own Venus Empire. I've seen their data, analyzed every fight, every technique. Hungry Wolf is growing fast. Give him time, and he'll outrank every top hero's expectations. A hush fell over the chamber as Ethan's words sank in. The Monster Association was no longer just a rogue faction. It was becoming a force to rival the galaxy's greatest threats. And at its core stood a beast yet to reach full power, one that might soon eclipse even the legendary Boros. Ethan gazed over the eclectic assembly gathered in the council chamber. We need to increase our species' diversity, he declared. A true interstellar empire must taste of countless worlds. He tapped a finger against the polished table. But that doesn't mean we exterminate every oddball who lands on Venus. Some of these life forms are far too intriguing to simply discard. He let his eyes drift to the three-eyed president cowering in the corner. Except for him, Ethan murmured, his face would tarnish the city's grandeur. He leaned back, amusement flickering in his expression. His thoughts turned to the Venusians, whom he'd nicknamed the Golden Humans. Unbound by genetic limiters, they soared past conventional training methods, no 5-year slog to invincibility, a la Saitama. Instead, they threw themselves into punishing regimens that wrung every last drop of potential from their bodies. The result was nothing short of astonishing. Even Boros, ruler of the One-Eyed Star, had come to spar with them. At first, the famed warlord assumed his veteran fighters would dominate. Yet as the matches wore on, he watched in disbelief as the Golden Humans strengthened before his very eyes, each session leaving them leaps and bounds ahead of his own champions. Boros could only shake his head in stunned frustration, secretly envious that his mighty race fell short of matching these extraordinary newcomers. Ethan stood at the heart of the Venus Empire, a sprawling, multi-ethnic realm ruled by the Venusians, proudly known as the Golden Humans. Boros, ever the champion of his race, beamed with anticipation at every display of increased power among his people. To him, each new surge in strength meant the promise of even greater heights for himself. Yet Ethan's true achievement lay elsewhere. He had somehow gathered a host of fearsome life forms, each rivaling the elite warriors Boros had once sought across the galaxy. Several of these beings even matched the strength, unjust combatants in Boros' original roster, and all had been subdued under Ethan's command. Alongside them, Ethan had orchestrated the transfer of Earth's vaccine people from the Hydra contingent to Venus. When Vaccine Man first encountered Boros, they clashed in a titanic battle. Although Boros ultimately claimed victory, Vaccine Man's unrivaled resilience earned him the title of the Empire's second strongest warrior, surpassed only by Boros himself. With the Empire's fate seemingly in capable hands, Ethan turned his attention elsewhere. He, Esdeath, and Android 18 slipped away for a leisurely honeymoon adventure in the world of One Punch Man, leaving Boros and the newly arrived vaccine people to oversee the Empire's affairs in their absence. At first, only Esdeath could claim the dubious honor of being Ethan's honeymoon partner, an unofficial title for anyone who survives his relentless morning drills. But after days of enduring his nonstop attention, even she finally cracked. Android 18, furious at being left out, stormed in and demanded her share of the action. Now both women face Ethan's daily ritual, an intrusive search enforced by his unbreakable golden hoop, day in, day out. Alert all available heroes, a dragon-level monster has appeared in downtown City S. Inside the Hero Association's Information Processing Division, tension crackled through the air. Around a towering hollow screen, senior officers exchanged grim looks. The monitor displayed a monstrous centipede, its body stretching over 100 meters and as wide as a small building. Each chitinous segment gleamed obsidian black, and its legs, thick as rolling hills, thudded ominously against the pavement. "This is the infamous Elder Centipede, the same one that attacked 2 years ago," said a thin man in wire-rimmed glasses, tapping at the live feed. And judging by its size, it's even larger than before. Ethan stood in the command center, staring in disbelief at the massive shape growing on the main monitor. "This thing is even bigger than we anticipated," one of the uniformed women reported, her voice tight with worry. "All contact's been lost with the Metal Bat squad," she added, glancing at her screen. "We've already called in A-class heroes and above for backup." A middle-aged officer across from Ethan wiped cold sweat from his brow. His eyes were glued to the display. "Its scale, it's nothing like the other anomalies we've dealt with." His counterpart, a burly man, exhaled in frustration. "At this rate, it'll become a full-blown natural disaster." A woman with cropped hair slammed her fist against the console. "If that behemoth tears through the city, it'll be catastrophic, just like the last giant that wiped out half a metropolis." Ethan's gaze hardened as the information team leader rose from his seat. "We cannot simply stand by," the leader declared, voice echoing through the hushed room. "Do whatever it takes to stop this monster from laying waste to the city." A spark of determination flickered in the eyes of every officer. They sprang into action, ready to support the unfolding mission, and Ethan prepared himself for the fight to come. Ethan stared at the wall of screens in the makeshift command center, his jaw set with determination. Reports of the Elder Centipede's rampage poured in from every district of S City. Buildings crumbled in its wake, terrified civilians huddled in underground shelters, and smaller heroes found themselves outmatched and outnumbered. He tapped into the communications network and barked orders. "Get reinforcements here now. Contact Metal Knight and Psychos. See if Flashy Flash can carve us a path through the rubble." Around him, analysts crowded a long table strewn with city maps and data pads. Every scrap of information on the Centipede's past battles, every grainy surveillance photo of its armored segments, was under intense scrutiny. Ethan knew that brute force alone wouldn't stop a creature of such size and resilience. "Look at the joint between its thorax and abdomen," he urged. There must be a weak point. Coordinate with the science division and feed me any structural readings they find." Half a mile away, in the ruined heart of the financial district, Metal Bat charged forward, his custom metal bat gleaming under the flashing emergency lights. Each swing sent a thunderous shockwave rattling through shattered glass and twisted steel. Despite the hero's raw power and unbreakable will, his blows slapped harmlessly against the Centipede's armored carapace. Dust billowed with every impact, but the monster pressed on, its dozens of legs pumping it forward like a living tank. Metal Bat's muscles trembled with the effort of holding the bat aloft. Sweat soaked his uniform and stung his eyes, but he refused to falter. He dropped his weight behind each strike, searching desperately for any vulnerability. His knuckles bleached white, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. If he could just crack a single chitin plate, just one, he might be able to split the creature open from within. Then, with an earth-shaking roar, Elder Centipede swung one massive foreleg in a wide arc. Metal Bat barely had time to brace himself. The bat slipped from his grip and went flying, spinning end over end through the air. He stumbled, breathless, as the ground shook beneath the beast's advance. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The dust, the flashing lights, the distant cries of panic. Even heroes needed a moment to gather themselves. Metal Bat's chest heaved, but his eyes burned with unwavering resolve. He knew the city's fate hinged on this battle. Clenching his fists, he willed his bat back into his hand, ready to strike again. Because giving up was never an option, not when so many lives depended on him. And somewhere, Ethan's voice crackled through the comlink, reminding him that every second counted. The war for S-City had reached its tipping point. Ethan slipped aside, narrowly avoiding the creature's strike. In one swift motion, he closed the gap to Elder Centipede, bracing himself. Clutching his bat with both hands, he summoned every ounce of strength and drove it into the beast's armored carapace. The weapon cut through the air with a sharp whistle as it struck home. Chapter 515, Elder Centipede. Boom! A deafening blast rattled across the battlefield. Dust and debris exploded skyward as though a bomb had detonated at ground level. When the cloud finally drifted away, everyone stared in disbelief. Elder Centipede stood nearly unscathed. It recoiled for only a heartbeat before surging forward again like a runaway tank, unstoppable and relentless. Ethan's grip tightened around his metal bat, his knuckles whitening. This weapon was famed for felling ghost-level threats and even slaying dragon-tier foes, yet now it seemed utterly powerless against the centipede's armored hide. He shook his head in awe. It's so tough. The centipede's next strike sent him flying. Only the sheer hardness of his alloy steel bat had prevented serious injury, its indestructible surface absorbing the blow like a shield. As Ethan scrambled to his feet amid shattered stone and earth, he wondered what exotic metal could withstand such force. No sooner had he risen than a dark shape lunged from the gloom. Ethan barely registered it before his reflexes kicked in. He swung the bat up to intercept an incoming punch that, at first glance, seemed deceptively small, but carried enough power to crush bone. When Ethan's fist slammed into the metal bat, a shockwave tore up his arm, nearly numbing it on the spot. The clang rang out like an ancient gong, echoing through an empty hall, leaving him momentarily stunned. "What the?" he gasped, brow furrowed in disbelief. Across from him stood a man unlike any ordinary criminal. His white hair curled in tight, ram-horn loops, so unnatural it was almost theatrical. Though his frame looked slender beneath those form-fitting clothes, every contour screamed of hard-earned muscle, lean in fabric yet packed with raw strength. The stranger's eyes burned with a feral excitement, as if he'd been starving for a fight. "I'm a weirdo," the man announced with a cocky grin, hefting the bat in both hands. "And you're S-class hero Ethan, right? Well, your opponent is me." He took a slow, deliberate step forward, knuckles whitening against the cool metal. "I'm going to hunt you." Ethan's pulse quickened. The alley's fluorescent lights flickered overhead, but in that moment all he saw was the hungry fire in his adversary's gaze. He shifted his stance, ready for whatever came next. Chapter 1. The Hero Hunter. Ethan leaned against a shattered lamppost, surveying the chaos around him. From a distance, Metalbat, one of the city's most dependable S-rank heroes, strode forward, his face set in a grim expression. Metalbat's deep voice cut through the din of sirens and screams. "You're the one who calls himself a weirdo and goes around hunting heroes." Ethan pushed off the lamppost, dust puffing from his boots. "That's what they call people like me. Weirdos. Apparently, we're mentally unstable or anti-human." He cocked an amused eyebrow. "I've heard rumors I've sent more than a few heroes to the hospital." Metalbat's eyes narrowed. "Rumors?" He exhaled sharply. "You even defeated Vestlord, one of the top-tier S-class heroes. How is that possible?" A slow, arrogant grin spread across Ethan's face. He ran a hand over the smooth metal of his custom bat. "They call me the Hungry Wolf," he said, voice low and confident. "The Hero Hunter." With a swift, liquid motion, Ethan swung the bat in a practice arc, the steel whistling through the air. He radiated ease, dangerous ease, but Metalbat remained unmoved. "I don't have time for games," Metalbat said, his tone icy now. "Elder Centipede is tearing through the city. Every second we waste here could cost hundreds of lives. I need to." "Believe me, I get it," Ethan interrupted lightly. "Heroes versus monsters, saving the world, all that. But my business is with corrupt or overrated so-called heroes. If that slows you down, tough luck." Metalbat's gaze sharpened, as if he could pierce straight through Ethan's smug exterior. Then, without another word, he spun on his heel and dashed back toward the raging battle. Ethan watched him go, the echo of Metalbat's footsteps swallowed by the city's roar. The Elder Centipede's screeches hammered at the skyline, and first responders urged civilians to flee. Ethan adjusted his grip on the bat and slipped into the shadows of the ruined street. Some called him insane. Others feared him as an anti-fan gone rogue. But tonight, the Hungry Wolf had a new hunt in mind, and he intended to make every hero regret crossing his path. Ethan had no way to take on Elder Centipede by himself. His only hope was to stall until the other S-class heroes arrived. He tore his eyes away from the rolling behemoth and fixed his gaze on the snarling figure before him. "One more step, and I'll blow your head off," he roared, swinging his metal bat in warning. Hungry Wolf only grinned. "Oh yeah? I'd like to see you try." Without hesitation, he closed the gap between them and unleashed a flurry of blows in a bizarre, lightning-fast style. Each water-smashing rock fist came from a new angle, unpredictable and precise, catching Ethan off guard again and again. Ethan braced himself, swinging the bat with all his strength, but he was always a half-step behind the wolf's shifting rhythm. Within a dozen breaths, he'd already absorbed several punishing strikes to the face. His vision swam, and his legs trembled beneath him. Then, with brutal finality, the wolf drove a straight punch clean through his guard. The impact blasted Ethan backward nearly 10 meters before he could right himself, skidding to a halt on shaking knees as dust and grit settled around him. Ethan stood there, blood matted on his face, exhaustion etched into every line of his features. Before him, the so-called hungry wolf kept his fists raised, head tilted in disdain as he studied Ethan's battered metal bat. "Told you," he sneered. "You're already wounded, your strength all but spent. I was curious to see what you could do, but this fight's over." At that, Ethan let out a low, ragged laugh, defiant, unbroken. The hungry wolf narrowed his eyes. He didn't understand why this beaten-up kid could still smile. Then, in the next instant, realization turned his cocky grin to panic. Ethan spun the dented bat in his grip and unleashed a counterattack with blistering speed and relentless power. Each swing crushed through the air like a hammer blow, fueled by every ounce of resentment and anger Ethan had been holding back. His strikes grew more precise and ferocious with each rotation, landing on the hungry wolf's vital points time and again. Surprise flickered in the wolf's eyes as he staggered beneath the unexpected onslaught. Ethan's laughter rang out again, trembling but triumphant, as the tide of battle shifted in an instant. Garou barely had time to react when Metalbat's swing snapped back at him. Already on the defensive, Garou thrashed wildly, trying to shake the hero's relentless assault that clung to him like a second skin. No matter how he twisted or struck back, Metalbat was always there, bat raised, ready for the next blow. "Now!" Metalbat roared, throwing every ounce of his strength into a downward smash. The bat drove into the pavement with an earth-shaking crack. A fissure split the ground in two, and Garou, unable to brace himself, was hurled backward by the sheer force. Metalbat didn't hesitate. He snatched up his weapon and charged forward, eager to finish what he'd started. He knew he couldn't best Garou in a fair fight, but if he destroyed Garou's footing, the martial artist would lose his balance, and that was all the opening he needed. Gathering every last bit of power, Metalbat unleashed his signature move, Grand Slam, home run. Garou's lupine eyes narrowed, his clawed hand darting up to block the devastating swing. But this time, there was no meddling sister to distract the hero. His strike came clean and true. The bat connected with a thunderous boom, sending shockwaves across the ruined plaza. On a nearby rooftop, Ethan, Esdeath, and Number 18 watched the spectacle unfold. Each held their breath as fragments of shattered stone rained down and the dust settled. Who woo? LD stand when the smoke cleared. Chapter 5 or 16, Life Always Finds a Way. Esdeath studied Ethan in the dim glow of the ice cavern, her breath misting in the frigid air. "My master, he's the ravenous wolf you warned me about?" she asked, skepticism lacing her tone. Ethan offered a wry smile, casually brushing frost from his coat. "Yes, and don't let his goofy act fool you. Obsession is one of the most dangerous powers out there. Some people become so fixated on eating crabs, they develop strength that rivals a specter. Others embrace baldness with such fanatical devotion that it transforms them into something peculiar." Esdeath's brow furrowed. "I've captured my share of oddballs, froze them solid, and shipped them off to the Venus Empire for study. But this hungry wolf of yours, is he just another freak?" He shook his head, amusement dancing in his eyes. "I'm not hauling around any secret files about him. People tend to turn into weirdos all on their own. My master, though, he's not merely strange. He's relentless, insatiable, truly ravenous in ways you can't imagine." Esdeath fell silent, the weight of his words settling over her. In that frozen stillness, she finally understood. Life and hunger will always find its own path. Ethan stood beside Esdeath as she surveyed the shattered landscape. Without warning, her voice, calm and distant, filled his mind. "In this world," she began, "monsters arise for two reasons. First, from within, people crushed by bad habits or unbearable pressures, their repressed desires erupting into violent transformations. Environmental factors can also trigger random genetic mutations, turning ordinary men and women into abominations. Second, from without, laboratories experimenting with chemical energies create monstrosities. Even untouched wildlife can warp into something deadly when poisoned by pollution or arcane forces. Ethan absorbed her words, then spoke aloud. So this world is ruled by chaos. Android 18, leaning against a cracked pillar, raised an eyebrow. Calling it chaotic is an understatement. Esdeath gave a small, almost wistful smile. Every realm has its own balance of light and dark. Without such extremes, heroes would have no trials worthy of song. The countless innocents who perish along the way, they're merely the backdrop, necessary contrast, so the hero's deeds shine brighter. Ethan chuckled softly. A backdrop, huh? Android 18's smile faded as she considered the scope of Esdeath's words. She thought of her home, the Dragon Ball world, where at least Ethan's legion stood guard. Even when the androids handed over alien prisoners to Dr. Garrow for experiments, Earth itself remained unscathed. And when all else failed, there were still the Dragon Balls, waiting to grant a single wish. In comparison, this world felt unbearably grim. Yet here they were, ready to face its horrors head-on. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he regarded number 18 across the ruined courtyard. It still amazed him that life could cling on so fiercely in this world. They were relentless. Even here, under the shadow of death, life will always find a way, he thought. Before number 18 could even register his words, Ethan's body lunged forward. At this speed, there was no exchange of information between them, only action. In his hands gleamed the metal bat he called Grand Slam Home Run. It swung in a perfect arc, promising a blow that could shatter mountains. No 18, known among scavengers as the Hungry Wolf, leapt to meet him, claws outstretched, motion swift as lightning. But his defense was hopelessly inadequate, little more than a praying mantis confronting an avalanche. Ethan's bat descended like a blazing meteor, every ounce of its weight driving through the air. The instant steel met flesh, the world snapped in two. A jagged, tearing roar split the wind, a scream of pressure, of destruction. The Hungry Wolf's body buckled beneath the impact, as helpless and fragile as a skiff caught in a typhoon's surge. Then, in a blinding flare of light, he nearly vanished. Only a titanic shock wave remained, rippling outward in a deafening thunderclaw. When the storm of dust and force finally settled, nothing of number 18 remained but scorched earth. Ethan stood amidst the settling haze, the heavy metal bat dripping in starlight. In this brutal world, tenacity was survival, and tonight it had belonged to him. The blast tore outward in an instant, obliterating every nearby building, tree, and boulder. Rubble and splintered wood flew in all directions as the Hungry Wolf's body was caught in the shockwave and hurled skyward. He described a long, graceful arc before smashing into the earth far below. The impact shook the ground like a minor earthquake, carving out a vast crater where he landed. From its rim, fissures spider-webbed across the terrain, as if the earth itself might split apart. Inside that yawning pit lay the wolf, motionless, his breaths shallow. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though he had been knocked unconscious. Watching from a distance, Metalbat's eyes widened in disbelief. He had not expected his strike to rattle the wolf so completely. Yet even as he registered the devastation, he knew this was only the beginning. He tightened his grip on his bat, ready to press the assault until the Hungry Wolf was utterly defeated. Then, without warning, the wolf surged from the crater. His eyes blazed with a wild, unquenchable fire. The real battle had just begun. Ethan's pupils constricted as his gaze turned knife-edged, slicing through Metalbat's defenses like he could pierce straight into his opponent's soul. Dust and blood clung to his skin, but the grime only accentuated the ferocity etched across his face. A savage sneer curled his lips, and his body trembled, not with fear, but with pure, unbridled rage and stubborn defiance. With a roar, Ethan unleashed a final, thunderous counterattack. His fists, driven by anger, refusal to yield, and desperate will to survive, hammered into Metalbat like battering rams. Each blow was more than a mere strike. It was a release of every pent-up emotion he harbored, a fierce declaration that he would not be beaten. Metalbat met the assault with unshakable resolve. His eyes blazed wide, unwavering, as if nothing could force him to back down. He pressed his lips into a determined line, veins bulging under the taut skin of his arms. Clutching the heavy bat, every fiber of his strength focused on wielding it with lethal precision, he prepared to parry the next onslaught. Ethan crouched low, muscles coiled like a cheetah about to spring. He wasn't intimidated by the wolf's frenzied assault. Instead, he felt a sharpening calm wash over him. His gaze never left the wolf, searching for any flaw, any hint of weakness he could exploit. He knew if he struck with perfect timing and precision, the wolf would fall in a single decisive blow. As the wolf swung its massive fist in a savage arc, Ethan did the unexpected. He didn't dodge. He charged straight into the attack, his metal bat meeting the wolf's punch with a thunderous clang. The impact shattered the momentum behind the wolf's blow and sent a shockwave through the clearing. Seizing the moment, Ethan swung his bat in a brutal backhand, driving it into the wolf's side with all his might. The two combatants spun into the air, each blow landing with Stormforce intensity. Ethan's bat sliced through the dusk, every strike fueled by his resolve to end the fight swiftly. Despite savage wounds bleeding into his armor, he drew strength from the pain, pushing off midair to launch another punishing assault. Even as the wolf howled in fury and pain, Ethan pressed his advantage. He felt the familiar surge of endurance that always followed his fiercest clashes. Bruised and bloodied, he refused to yield. With each swing, each thunderous collision of metal and flesh, he drove closer to the moment of victory, unyielding, focused, unstoppable. Whenever Ethan takes a wound in battle, his body responds by growing stronger and faster, a phenomenon he calls momentum. In his fight against Garou, a single swing of his staff split an entire building down the middle, and the ensuing gust was powerful, enough to crack the earth beneath them. Chapter 517, Looking for a Hungry Wolf in a Garbage Dump. Whether Metal Bat can really become a dragon depends entirely on the circumstances, one spectator remarked. If he'd shown up during the association arc, everything would have been different. According to the One Punch Man official handbook, Metal Bat's power can climb to infinity when he's at the peak of his rage. Infinity. What does that even mean? Maybe he really could topple the bald devil with a single swing. But speculation aside, Metal Bat planted his feet, tightened his grip on the bat, and felt every muscle in his body coil. Veins bulged under his skin, a testament to the raw strength he was about to unleash. He drew in a deep breath and hoisted the bat high above his head, prepared to strike with everything he had. For a heartbeat, the entire battlefield seemed to hold its breath. Garou stared back just as intently. He knew that if he misjudged this attack, it would be the last he ever saw. Only moments ago, he'd barely managed to defuse his opponent's previous blow. Had he failed, he'd be dead or crippled by now. Metal Bat brought the bat down in a sweeping arc, its shadow drawing a lethal curve through the air. Ethan's swing struck like a thunderclap. The building's walls split as cleanly as paper, concrete cracking and steel rebars snapping apart in an instant. Yet his momentum didn't wane. In one fluid motion, he drove the bat all the way through, shearing the structure neatly in two. The shockwave rippled across the battlefield, rattling nearby fighters and sending a plume of dust and debris skyward. In that hazy whirlwind, Ethan loomed larger than ever, unstoppable. He didn't hesitate. Harnessing every ounce of power left in his swing, he barreled forward, roar ringing out over the chaos. Momentum, raging roar, critical strike. His bat cut through the air, generating blade-sharp gusts that shredded the ground itself. Dirt and stone flew apart, ripped open by the invisible force of his attack. Even as the earth fractured beneath him, Ethan's advance never faltered. Dust clouding his path, he pressed on, bat cocked for the next devastating blow. Ethan's silhouette loomed against the howling wind, as if a war god had descended upon the ruined battlefield. Every swing of his metal bat crackled with raw power and unbreakable resolve, each blow aimed at completely overwhelming his adversary. Across from him, Garou, the notorious hero hunter, gathered himself for a counterattack. He believed that only by toppling Ethan could he prove his own unrivaled strength. "Hero hunter," he snarled, and in an instant his muscles and bones began to vibrate in perfect sync. Veins and tendons twisted beneath his skin as he channeled his breath into the flowing water rock-crushing fist. In a blur, Garou's fist struck at Ethan's joints, targeted every force-bearing muscle, and sought out even the smallest tendon for leverage. Blood splattered over Ethan's face, but his stance never wavered. He looked down at Garou like an unbreakable overlord, utterly indifferent to the torrent of attacks. "How is this possible?" Garou gasped, staggering back in disbelief. He had unleashed 100 thunderous strikes in the space of a heartbeat, and still, Ethan endured. Then, with a single, earth-shaking boom, Ethan brought his metal bat down. Its arc cut through the air like a blazing meteor under a titan's hammer. Garu's arms shattered under the impact, and he was sent crashing to the ground. The hero hunter lay defeated, helpless beneath the irresistible force of Ethan's might. A thunderous crash split the battlefield as the wolf's body slammed into the earth. The impact unleashed a blast of air so powerful it buckled the ground, carving out a massive crater at its center. Cracks snaked outward like shattered glass, and chunks of soil and stone exploded skyward, shrouding everything in a choking cloud of dust. At the bottom of the pit, the wolf lay sprawled, every bone aching as though ground to splinters. Pain shot through him with each ragged breath. He tried to rise, but his limbs were numb, his strength had been utterly drained. High above, Metal Bat stood at the rim, his bat casually resting on one shoulder. His face was streaked with mud and flecked with blood, yet his eyes burned with fierce conviction. He drew in a deep breath, held it for a heartbeat, then let it out in a measured exhale. "Stay down," he ordered quietly but unmistakably. In the pit, Garu glared up at him, every inch of his being consumed by anger and unwillingness. He knew, hated to admit it, that he'd been defeated. But to bow his head and accept that defeat, that was a surrender he refused to make. Ethan's legs shook uncontrollably as he forced himself upright. Every muscle in his body felt like it was betraying him. All he could do was stare in helpless dismay at Metal Bat, his heart pounding with equal parts admiration and dread. Having finally put Garu out of commission, Metal Bat wasted no time. He whipped his bat overhead, roared, and bounded toward the gargantuan form of Elder Centipede, who was laying waste to the city without restraint. With every passing second, the monstrous insect's rampage claimed still more lives and destroyed entire blocks of buildings. "Damn it! Get out of my way!" Elder Centipede's 1,000 mandibles clicked in scorn as Metal Bat closed the distance. To the ancient horror, none of the other heroes mattered. Only Blast, the top-ranking S-Class hero, was worthy of his attention. But Metal Bat was far from spent. Blood plastered his uniform, his knuckles raw from gripping his bat so tightly it had splintered in spots. Yet he seemed to grow only stronger, more feral as he charged. With superhuman agility, he leaped over overturned cars and slammed his weapon into the centipede's armored carapace. At the lip of the enormous pit the creature had carved into the city, Esdeath and Ethan watched in tense silence. Behind them, Metal Bat's sister, now safely evacuated to Hero Association headquarters, had been sent away by Ethan himself long before the battle escalated to this scale. "She suffered a nasty blow, but she's still alive," Number 18 murmured, her brow furrowed as she monitored Metal Bat's fluctuating power signature. Esdeath's pale eyes widened. "Incredible, his vitality is off the charts. As long as his head remains intact, he'll recover and only grow stronger." Ethan pressed a hand to his forehead, trying to steady his thoughts. "He can't hold out forever," he said quietly. "But every second he lasts is time we buy for the city and for Blast to arrive." He looked back down at the chaos below. Metal Bat locked in a brutal back and forth with the centipede, each blow sending shockwaves through the crater. Ethan clenched his fists. Whatever came next, they would need every hero on their feet, and every ounce of hope they could muster. Ethan worked in near darkness at the edge of the pit, tossing in fresh, still-dripping chunks of tissue. Down below, Garu, once on the brink of destruction from Metal Bat's savage strike, had somehow stirred back to life, reborn as a full demon-level monster. In the original timeline, he would never have stood a chance against the Worm God or the Bandage Monster. But Garu was a creature honed by adversity. The harder he was hit, the stronger he became. Metal Bat's hammer blow had nearly shattered him, and that agony was precisely the crucible he needed. Now Garu crouched amid the heaped remains of dragon-class flesh and sinew Ethan had scavenged. Each new offering, writhing tendons from lesser demon spawn, membranous scraps pulled from freshly defeated bandage creatures, was pulled by Garu into his chest, fusing with his own flesh. His obsession to transcend mortal limits drove the metamorphosis. Threads of once-living muscle writhed over his arms, scales sprouted along his spine. The air hung heavy with the coppery tang of blood and the sickly sweetness of demonic ichor. Clothing that had once covered Garou lay in tatters around him. Now, nothing separated his ruptured flesh from the monster parts that seeped together until Garou himself was a living amalgam, half man, half unnamable horror. With every piece absorbed, his limbs lengthened, his claws deepened, and a low, feral growl rumbled from his throat. Ethan peered down, heart pounding. This was far beyond mere strength or resilience. Garou was rewriting the very architecture of his body, ascending into something wholly new and terrifying. Chapter 518, The Birth of the Dragon-Level Monster. Garou, once a lone wanderer straddling the line between humanity and monstrosity, has now awakened with a new resolve. No longer the same fighter who barely kept pace with demon-level threats like the Bug God and the Bandage Monster, and who was brought to the brink of annihilation by Metal Bat's devastating strike, he has risen again from the depths of pain and despair. Metal Bat's blow came like a thunderclap, nearly shattering Garou beyond repair. Yet it was precisely that near-destructive impact that unlocked the dormant power within him. As his consciousness drifted in darkness, Garou's will clawed its way back to life, forging a path toward rebirth. Fueled by an obsessive drive to survive, his body initiated a miraculous process of self-reconstruction. At the same time, Ethan flung a variety of monster tissues into the pit where Garou lay. These weren't random scraps, but prized organs and cells harvested from dragon-level creatures, each brimming with potent energies and uncanny abilities. Piled like construction materials around Garou's battered form, they provided the vital building blocks for his transformation. Slowly, the foreign tissues fused with his own flesh. Veins writhed as new sinews knitted together, bones reshaped, and power surged through every fiber of his being. From the wreckage of his former self, a far more formidable monster began to emerge, dragon-level Garou reborn. Ethan's own flesh and blood began to merge with the monstrous tissues as if a hidden force willed their fusion. Dragon-level sinews and bone reknit themselves inside him, and in the days that followed, his body erupted in a seismic transformation. No longer wholly human, Ethan had become something entirely new, a living fusion of man and monster, with a strange power quietly stirring at its core. The first change showed itself at the surface. Wherever his human skin met the draconic tissue he had cast upon himself, an almost alchemical bonding took hold. His epidermis thickened and hardened into iron-like plates, forming a natural armor that could shrug off attacks and amplify every ounce of his strength. Below that armored shell, deeper shifts were underway. His muscles rewove with dragon sinew until every fiber had the tensile strength of tempered steel, tough, springy, and brimming with raw power. His skeleton too grew denser and more flexible, bones bending yet unbreakable under crushing force. With each pulse of this new vitality, Ethan's metamorphosis pressed on, shaping him into a being neither wholly human nor wholly beast, and yet more formidable than either. Ethan felt something deep inside him shift as the mysterious power coursing through his veins remade his body. His heart began to pound with new strength, pumping life through arteries that now seemed reinforced from within. His lungs expanded more fully with each breath, drawing in oxygen as though his very cells were starving for it. As these physical changes took hold, Ethan's mind sharpened in tandem. Trapped in that dark pit, he had hovered at the edge of death, but now, like a phoenix rising from ash, he found himself reborn. The frail kid who'd crumpled under a metal baseball bat was gone. In his place stood a brand new beast, every muscle carved from iron, every sinew honed for raw power. Beneath his skin, hot blood surged like molten lava, and each heartbeat echoed like distant thunder. He flexed his fingers. Where once they had been thin and weak, they now felt hard, unbreakable, like cold steel. A living force thrummed through every cell, and with a gentle clench of his fist, that power coalesced at his fingertips like a raging torrent, ready to tear down anything in its path. In that moment, Ethan knew he was no longer the same, and whatever lay ahead, he would face it stronger than ever. His bones felt like tempered steel, every movement brimming with raw power and unshakable resolve. Ethan swung his fists in wide, earth-shattering arcs, as though he could topple mountains with a single blow. His Odie had long since transcended human limits, morphing into something inhuman. With each inhale, a violent frost-cold gale burst from his lungs, chilling the very air around him and sending shivers racing down every spine. A keen, merciless light blazed in his eyes, as if he could penetrate every lie and all hypocrisy, glimpsing into the darkest corners of the human heart. The aura that radiated from him outshone everything nearby, like a brilliant beacon piercing the blackest night. In that instant, Ethan stood no longer at the fragile boundary between man and monster. He had crossed it, becoming a true creature of legend. His form bore the traits of countless dragon-tier beasts, strength beyond measure and speed that defied perception. He cleared skyscrapers in a single bound and vanished from sight as though swallowed by the wind. Then, in the stunned silence that followed, a lone voice finally broke free. What happened? Ethan staggered as if a metal baseball bat had just struck him. He blinked, disoriented, doubt flickering in his eyes. But the instant he became aware of the raw power surging through his veins, his expression hardened. He whispered, tasting the strength that pulsed in every fiber of his being. This sensation, liberating body, mind, and soul, lifted every burden he'd ever carried. Each punch, each kick, felt weightless, effortless, impossibly precise. Was this what it meant to become a monster? He lifted his gaze to the sky, his eyes alight with fierce determination. His body felt honed into a razor-sharp blade, primed to cut through anything in its path. His speed soared beyond anything he'd known before, like a bolt of lightning tearing across the heavens. Without warning, he launched himself forward. The wind howled past his ears as the earth trembled beneath each footfall. Every jump he made seemed to boil the air around him. In that moment, Ethan was no longer just a man. He was one with the world, an unstoppable force of nature. Then, as suddenly as it began, he came to a halt. Heart-pounding, he tilted his head back and stared up at the vast open sky. Ethan stared up at the sky. Once a boundless weight pressing down on his chest, it now seemed small and distant. He was no longer the weakling at everyone's mercy, but a man strong enough to command the world. Clenching his fists, he felt raw power crackle at his fingertips, power that would become his greatest weapon on the road ahead. He no longer feared defeat or scorn. He possessed enough strength to shake the very foundations of the world. He watched Garu with quiet amazement. His pile of garbage, the drained, tattered remains of countless dragon-level monsters, had vanished entirely. Every scrap of tissue and bone had become nourishment, fueling Garu's boundless growth, and through him, Ethan's own ascension. It was incredible to witness, a single entity capable of absorbing the might of dragons and turning it into pure, unstoppable power. Chapter 519, Rebirth from the Shell. Ethan watched Garu closely, feeling the raw power radiating from him. It was a terrifying level of strength, roughly on par with a figure known only as Hero, one of the Monster Association's most formidable operatives. That comparison alone said everything. Hero had once been the undefeated champion of the very first national martial arts tournament. After losing a match against a monster, he'd been abducted, indoctrinated by the Monster Association, and forced to consume monster cells until he too became a monster. As the association's chief advisor and the mastermind behind the Monster King Orochi, Big Eyes, better known in those circles as Sykes, pulled the strings of every major operation. If even he respected Hero's might, no one could underestimate it. Sykes had once ranked the entire battle-ready roster by sheer destructive potential. At the top were the 4 S-Class heroes, Blast, Hellfire Tornado, Metal Knight, and King. Then came the gargantuan Elder Centipede, followed by Master Bang, and finally Hero himself. In other words, 1. Blast, 2. Hellfire Tornado, 3. Metal Knight, 4. King, 5. Elder Centipede, 6. Bang, 7. Hero. Only those first 4 had any realistic hope of defeating Elder Centipede. The rest would be crushed. Now, witnessing Garu's newfound ferocity, Ethan realized this young fighter might soon eclipse even Hero's monstrous power. And if that happened, the entire balance of strength within the Monster Association was about to shift, perhaps catastrophically so. Ethan, the heroic doll, had just toppled the water dragon. Emboldened by the devastating power of his Stormwind fist, he'd already surpassed Bang in raw strength. Nearby, Metal Bat and the Centipede Elder were locked in brutal combat. Garu grinned, itching to wade into Metal Bat's fight, when 2 uncanny figures suddenly stepped between him and his target. Garu came to a halt and studied them coolly. "What's this?" he rumbled. "Are you here to face the hero hunter, Garou?" The taller of the two was known as the Cutting King, his entire body swathed in ragged bandages. Beneath that wrapping, his enormous eyes blinked with genuine curiosity and wariness. But it was Garou's own appearance that made the Cutting King hesitate. Garou's muscles bulged with inhuman geometry, his skin fractured by layers of chitinous shell, downy feathers, and overlapping scales. He hadn't yet sprouted the horns of his full devil form, but the sheer, primal aura he exuded was impossible to ignore. These accretions weren't mere decoration, they had fused with his flesh, becoming living extensions of his terrifying power. Ethan's body had fused with the alien elements so completely it was as if they'd grown from his own flesh, weaving into his muscles, bones, and blood to forge an entirely new form. A dense coat of feathers covered him from head to toe, each plume gleaming softly, an iridescent layer of living armor. Beneath that silken mantle lay overlapping insect carapaces, their dark brown and jet-black shells polished to a lacquered shine. These chitinous plates amplified his strength and made swords or striking blows glance off harmlessly. Interspersed among the feathers and plates, scales of animal origin formed a final, unyielding barrier. Some measured barely a few millimeters, others stretched 10 centimeters long, all fitting together like pieces of a flawless mosaic. Their colors ranged from deep sapphire and vibrant crimson to mottled umber, creating a stunning, impenetrable defense that transformed Ethan into a walking fortress. Ethan's torso was sheathed in dark, iridescent scales that not only bolstered his defense, but let him slice through water with uncanny ease. From the way the sunlight danced across his armor-like hide, he looked every bit the monster, a creature of raw power and unsettling, inharmonious beauty. "I am Ethan," he said simply, his voice steady as it echoed across the flooded cavern. A massive figure stepped forward, its twin blades glinting menacingly. "Come with us," the warrior rumbled. "We represent the Monster Association." Before the Cutting King could utter another word, a colossal shape intercepted him. The insect god, a grotesque behemoth of chitin and mandibles, rocked the cavern with a thunderous impact. Ethan seized the moment. His fist crashed into the insect god's thorax, shattering its upper body into slag and splattering blood and viscera across the Cutting King's armor. Ethan didn't pause. He pivoted and drove a crushing blow into the Cutting King's skull, pressing bone and brain matter back into the king's own chest. The great warrior sagged, then collapsed in a lifeless heap. Wiping crimson smears from his knuckles, Ethan flexed his fist as though dusting off a stubborn stain. "So fragile," he murmured, glancing at the shattered chitin. "I'm the only real monster here." According to the original prophecy, the combined might of the Cutting King and the insect god should have overwhelmed him, dragging him back into the Monster Association's clutches. Now, standing victorious amid the wreckage, Ethan felt nothing but contempt for any organization that dared to claim him. He scanned the silent battlefield, his voice low and defiant. "So, where is this Monster Association now?" "I'm the only monster, Garou." With a single motion, Garou seized the Slicer King by the collar. Though still alive, the king's eyes bulged in disbelief. Garou had just felled the insect god, renowned for his impenetrable defense, with one punch, and now he was grinding the Slicer King down with blows too powerful to block. Gasping through cracked lips, the Slicer King managed, "The Monster Association, there beneath City Z, Garou." The revelation struck him like cold steel. If Garou tore the association apart, or if the association destroyed Garou first, both sides would be left in ruins. But the monster in front of him cared little for such strategy. After extracting the city's location, Garou landed a final, bone-shaking uppercut. "Humph, I'll handle you later." Without another backward glance, he turned and strode towards City Z, his trenchcoat flapping behind him like a dark banner. Meanwhile, Metal Bat and the Elder Centipede were locked in a savage duel. Every swing of Metal Bat's club, once his trusted weapon, felt as though it weighed a ton. Each strike demanded every ounce of his strength. Every parry threatened to snap his arms in two, yet he refused to yield. With gritted teeth and unwavering resolve, he pressed the assault, determined to bring the monstrous centipede down, even if it cost him everything. Ethan slammed his bat down again. The last time he'd struck the Elder Centipede, he'd only managed to crack a sliver of its armored shell. This time, however, he deliberately added more weight to each swing, and with every thunderous blow, the centipede let out anguished roars. Ethan couldn't believe his own strength, but neither could the monster. "I'm going to crush you," Ethan bellowed, gritting his teeth as he brought his massive bat, his 100-million-ton rod, crashing down on the centipede's carapace. The creature twisted to avoid the blow, but it was a fraction too slow. The bat smashed home with shocking force, and the giant centipede collapsed in a rain of shell fragments, its body flopping limply onto the rubble. Ethan staggered backward, muscles burning. He dropped to one knee, gasping for air, certain the fight was over. His chest heaved, sweat blurring his vision, until a shuddering crack sounded behind him. He spun around just in time to see the shattered shell crawl and reform, bigger, tougher, deadlier than before. The elder centipede was reborn. Its new carapace gleamed menacingly in the dust-choked air, proof that this monster's most fearsome weapon was its terrifying ability to regenerate. Nolan's blaster might slow it down, but it would never truly kill it. And now, with its renewed armor, the real battle was about to begin. Chapter 520, Proud Wolf. The crowd gaped in disbelief at Metalbat. Regeneration. Really? This was getting absurd. Elder Centipede flexed its newly restored body, then fixed Metalbat with a taunting grin. "What's the matter, boy? Not up to the challenge?" With a deafening roar, the centipede lashed out. Its colossal head dove straight for Metalbat, the twin horns atop its skull, over 10 meters long each, gleaming like sharpened blades. Metalbat slammed his iron bat into the oncoming horns, sparks flying as metal screeched against chitin. "Don't underestimate me," he snarled. "I can go all day." He thrust the bat forward with every ounce of his strength. Yet once again, the centipede shrugged off the blow as if it were nothing. The impact rebounded so violently that Metalbat was flung backward. His gloves split open, and blood oozed through the gaps. Gasping for breath, Metalbat spat a glob of dark blood to the ground. "Master, are you just going to watch? Aren't you going to step in?" From the sidelines, General Esdeath raised an eyebrow, turning to Ethan with genuine surprise. "Is this the advantage you've been boasting about?" Ethan merely smiled, cool and composed. "Why should I intervene?" he replied softly. "Someone's kindly volunteering to strengthen my future subordinates for free. Why spoil the lesson?" Ethan hefted his metal bat, feeling its power surge like a coiled spring. With each swing, the bat seemed to gather momentum without end, much like the legendary Green Hulk. Across the battlefield, the monstrous Elder Centipede reared its segmented armor. No one could say how many times it could shatter its shell only to be reborn stronger, but its iron-hard plating had already withstood countless assaults. If Ethan and the creature kept clashing, grinding each other down, Esdeath could wait for her moment to strike. Esdeath hovered at the edge of the fray, brows furrowed in puzzlement. She'd counted on Elder Centipede wearing Ethan down before she moved in, but she'd underestimated her opponent's unrelenting offense. Before she could decide on her next maneuver, a thunderous roar split the air. Reinforcements from the Hero Association had arrived. Metal Knight. The veteran hero strode forward, but rather than a battalion of elite fighters, he'd brought nothing more than prototype soldiers, living test subjects for his newest weapon designs. Meanwhile, across the globe, the Monster Association had launched a coordinated assault on human cities. At the Hero Association's command center, President Jace stared at the incoming dispatches in horror. "Sir, we've just received word that A-rank hero King Chong has been overwhelmed by a monster in Eastgate City." The news struck him like a hammer to the chest. King Chong, renowned for his raw strength, defeated by a beast? And that was only the beginning. Report after report arrived in a devastating cascade, heroes of every rank falling in battle, one after another, as the Monster Association's onslaught spread without mercy. The Hero Association's Crisis Response Office felt like a pressure cooker. Monitors lining the walls flashed one grim bulletin after another. A-class hero Raiguang Genji confronted an unknown anomaly in D-City. Total mission failure. Metal Knight and Metal Bat remain unaccounted for, believed to be locked in battle with Elder Centipede. Each update struck Ethan like a sharpened arrow, driving him deeper into despair. He slammed his fist against his desk, the impact rattling papers and echoing his frustration. For over an hour, monsters had poured into every major city, and every available hero was dispatched to meet them, only to fall, one after another. The weight of those losses pressed down on him, clouding his thoughts. "Report," he growled, muscles tense as a young staffer stepped forward. The aide hesitated, unease plain on his face. Ethan fixed him with a cold stare. "Which hero has fallen this time?" The staffer swallowed. "No, sir. Actually, there's good news from our Z City branch. S-class hero Silver Fang has driven off the invaders and secured the city." At last, a spark of relief flared in Ethan's chest. A genuine smile cracked through his gloom. If even one hero could turn the tide, maybe, just maybe, they still had a chance to save humanity. Ethan finally heard the long-awaited news. An S-class hero had defeated the monster. A faint smile tugged at his lips. S-class really were the backbone of humanity's defense. He let out a slow breath, the tight knot in his chest loosening for the first time all day. These were their last, best warriors, the only ones who could stand up to these abominations. "Have we made contact with any of the other S-class heroes?" Ethan asked, turning to his aide. "Not yet, sir," the aide replied, pressing buttons on a console. "We're trying every secure channel, but there's been no response." Ethan's jaw clenched. The creatures had appeared in multiple districts simultaneously. This was no random attack, but a calculated invasion. Who was orchestrating it, and to what end? He rose and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Below, the city had been reduced to a ghost town. Abandoned cars sat at odd angles, their doors hanging open. Streetlights flickered or lay smashed on the pavement. Every now and then, the distant wail of a police siren or the roar of a fire engine shattered the heavy silence. Civilians were scrambling for safety, and panic had become the dominant emotion. Ethan stared out over the devastation, his mind already racing through possible strategies. He had no time for despair. A sudden sonic boom drew his attention back to street level. Hero number 18 appeared in a swirl of dust, calmly raising his arm. A crackling wave of qigong energy surged forward, incinerating a snarling creature that had been barreling down the avenue. In an instant, it was reduced to nothing but ash. Without a word, number 18 turned and strode off, ready for the next threat. Ethan's heart pounded, not with fear, but with resolve. If the S-class heroes could hold the line, he would find out who was pulling the strings behind this invasion and send them a message they'd never forget. Chapter: The Hungry Wolf's Hunt. Esdeath leaned back against the rooftop parapet, arms folded, as she and Ethan watched the lone figure below. Known only as the Hungry Wolf, he navigated the ruined streets with uncanny precision, cutting down one grotesque enemy after another without hesitation. "He's actually taking out all those freaks single-handedly?" Esdeath drawled, an amused glint in her eyes. Ethan didn't interrupt his gaze. "He's twisted. He believes fear is the only true ruler of humanity. No heroes, no so-called weirdos, just absolute submission under his iron paw." Esdeath raised an eyebrow. A savior by terror, morbidly fascinating. Ethan's lips curled into a faint, disapproving smile. "If you call mass slaughter fascinating." Below them, the Hungry Wolf paused at the mouth of a darkened alley, his back to the moonlight. Every muscle in his lean frame was coiled, ready to strike. In that desolate corner of the city, Garou prowled like a cornered predator. His eyes burned with feral hunger, and his posture was that of a beast poised to pounce. Shadows clung to him as though the night itself was his cloak. Out of the gloom stepped a squad of monsters, hulking miscreations of the Monster Association. Their limbs were grotesquely elongated, their faces twisted into permanent snarls. Some brandished crude blades, others roared with bestial fury. Garou cracked his knuckles and let out a low, mocking laugh. "Is this the best the Monster Association can muster? I've fought more fearsome opponents in my sleep." With those words, he sprang forward, his body a blur of controlled violence, ready to show these abominations exactly what the Hungry Wolf was capable of. Ethan stood alone in the dimly lit clearing as the pack of monsters closed in on him. Their snarls grew louder, metal weapons raised high, eyes blazing with rage. But in Ethan's gaze, they were nothing more than prey. With a fluid sidestep, he evaded their first lunge, then unleashed a brutal counterattack, rending one creature limb from limb in a single, merciless motion. Without hesitation, he sank his teeth into its flesh, feasting as if he'd been starving for years. The remaining monsters froze in horror. They'd never faced an opponent so swift, so savage. Desperate, they turned to flee, but Ethan moved faster than any of them could hope. In moments, he had cut them down one by one, each final gasp drowned out by the sound of tearing sinew. One broken creature, clutching its severed arm, cried out, Why do you do this? We're all monsters here." Ethan paused, wiping blood from his mouth. His voice was cold and hollow as he replied, "Because I've grown tired of monsters like you." Once a mere human seeking strength, Ethan had abandoned his former self. Power had become his sole hunger, and to claim it, he had embraced the monster within. Now, nothing would stand in his way. He would rise above all others to become the strongest, no matter the cost.